let's get started. Do we have a quorum?
I'll tell you in just a sec.
You get your mic closer.
Oh, can everybody hear me? Hello? Can everybody hear me? Okay.
I'll call the roll. Commissioner Graham? Commissioner Hutton? Absent. Commissioner Skinner? Commissioner Needham?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Slavic? Here. Commissioner Appel? Commissioner Gibb Randall?
Here.
Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Commissioner Callowart?
Here.
Chair Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Overbeck? And Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. So, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So,
Second.
Second. Let's have a vote for approval of the agenda, right?
aye.
All aye. Any nays? No, passed unanimously. Approval of minutes from the June 27th meeting. Okay. Do I have a second? Okay. All who say aye, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, it passes unanimously. So, let's see. So this is the time for public commentary. Please come up to the microphone and when you're recognized, and public commentary is limited to, I believe, 3 minutes, okay? So we'll keep a clock, and you'll get a signal that your time's up. So let's see, does anybody wish to approach the microphone for public commentary? Over here. Come on up. Yeah. So please state your name first.
I can hear you. Talbot Hack. Everybody hear me okay? Great.
Yeah.
Just going to read a statement. Good evening. My name is Talbot Hack. I've been a resident of the Second Ward since 1992. My wife Jan and I have raised our 3 kids here, and I work for Arbor Networks, NetScout Systems here in town. I care really deeply about the environment in our community, and I appreciate the work that all of you do on this commission on behalf of the city. I've been a member of the Recycle Ann Arbor Board for 13 years, including 2 years as the chair, and I'm speaking on behalf of RAA tonight. RAA has been providing curbside recycling collection and numerous other zero waste services in the city for 41 years. The city's recent public opinion survey found that 93% of city residents are satisfied or very satisfied with RAA's curbside service. And as the draft solid waste plan notes, the city of Ann Arbor has been a leader in waste reduction and recycling programs for decades. As the city's primary service provider and partner on these programs for all these years, RAA deserves no small amount of credit for Ann Arbor's reputation in this area, which makes it actually all the more shocking that the draft plan that we'll be discussing, I think, tonight proposes removing RAA from the core of this partnership, the curbside collection service specifically, without seeking any competitive bids. The city apparently believes they can provide a similar service at half the cost, and we just don't agree with that at all. We question the financial rigor behind this argument. In our opinion, the city report does not compare apples with apples, and the proposed approach would actually increase the city's costs substantially. The Commission should have received a letter today with RAA's detailed analysis and conclusions. Frankly, the only way to derive accurate costs for a future curbside service is to seek competitive bids. We welcome transparency in the bidding process that compares actual costs. We think such a process would reveal RAA's operations are not only cost-effective, but are also mission-effective. As you, I'm sure, know, RAA is a nonprofit organization. All of our board members are volunteers dedicated to advancing the mission of the organization. Any operating surplus is reinvested into our mission and the programs that directly affect this community, advancing our collective efforts to promote a circular economy. The partnership between the city and RAA has provided our community with consistent, reliable recycling and zero waste services that do not exist in most communities in the United States. And this includes the comprehensive drop-off station, the reuse center down on South Industrial, the Urban Woods Center, the recovery yard for construction materials and debris, zero waste event management, and much more. These services are used by tens of thousands of Ann Arbor area residents and businesses every year. We are Michigan's oldest, largest, and most diversified nonprofit recycling zero waste organization, working with public, private, and other nonprofits to build a strong zero waste ethic in our community and with the infrastructure to make it real. Our service has been a critical part of what's distinguished Ann Arbor's national recycling and zero waste leadership. We urge you, please do not throw that all away. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Anybody else? Okay.
My name is Tom McMurtry. A group of us from the Solid Waste Resource Plan Advisory Committee sent out an email to the Commission yesterday. I would like to summarize the key points of that email. First of all, the plan does not adequately address one of two crises in the city's solid waste system, the recycling infrastructure. The city's MRF has been closed for 3 years, forcing huge financial expense to the city, diminished sorting capacity to the region, and added carbon emissions on the planet. The recycling drop-off station has been in need of replacement for 15 years. We strongly believe that the city should prioritize the reopening of the shuttered MRF. The plan abandons any role in recycling collection and education for RAA. Recycle Ann Arbor started curbside service in Ann Arbor 41 years ago. Virtually every aspect of recycling services in Ann Arbor has been provided by RAA during that time. The projected cost savings of eliminating RAA are not credible. Currently, the residential sector has high recovery rates and extremely high, over 90% support, residential support. An alternate way of consolidating solid waste services by material stream instead of service sector was repeatedly suggested by committee members and was repeatedly ignored. The current plan continues the confusion of having several entities collecting recycling material. We would prefer to see recycling collection consolidated under one collection provider. The plan includes no zero waste proposals in spite of a lengthy set of suggestions offered early in the process by committee members. The plan offers no vision or goals for the city's solid waste programs. There were no stated environmental, financial, or performance goals in the plan, despite the fact that all our previous plans had those. Critical objections from the advisory committee were ignored. Requests for test votes on controversial recommendations were denied, despite the fact that the organizers allowed the group to vote on other matters. We support year-round organics collection and the proposals to improve downtown services. These two things were included in the plan. We urge the Environmental Commission to recommend that the residential organics proposal and the downtown section of the plan be adopted by City Council and that the remainder of the plan be set aside and be used for informational purposes only. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come to the microphone?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Sorry, please state your name first.
Yeah, I'm Ian Robinson. I've been a resident of Ann Arbor for 20 years. I'm also the president of the Huron Valley Area Labor Federation, which is the AFL-CIO at the county level, 4 counties, including Washtenaw, representing about 50 local unions and about 20,000 workers. I'd like to observe, first of all, that workers are important stakeholders in this process that we're talking about tonight, both on the Recycle Ann Arbor side and on the county side. We have union workers, and yet they weren't really incorporated into this planning process. So I'd like to suggest that in the future, when these kinds of matters are being discussed, that unions and workers should be part of that discussion in a formal way. Turning to what seems to be coming out of the current process, we at Huron Valley and the affiliates, which include the city workers, oppose the proposal to consolidate solid waste services by service sector, meaning dividing them between residential and commercial. Instead, we support the counterproposal that would explore consolidating services by material stream. So recycling on the one hand, waste on another, and compost as three streams that could be consolidated, each one. That approach is one that's favored by a number of groups in addition to Huron Valley that we've been talking with, both on the labor side, and I think you heard a version of that by the previous speaker. I think it's really important for public entities, city, county, the University of Michigan, all of these kinds of bodies that have elected leadership and serve the public interest, to recognize that an important part of what that public interest is ensuring that the employees who do the work are union represented and are paid living wages of the sort that union representation is generally able to secure, and lack of it is generally not. And so it's really important, as part of the overall deliberations, in addition to considering what makes a rational and efficient waste and recycling system, to also think about how do we ensure that we use union workers as much as possible. If we consolidate recycling under Recycle Ann Arbor and we consolidate solid waste disposal under county workers, then we have all of the work being done by union workers, which is not the case now and would not be the case under the proposal that the person hired and paid $250,000 to come up with these recommendations has proposed. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, this concludes the public comment period. There'll be another one later, so you'll have, oh.
I was just going to say, maybe, should I go later after the
No, you can come up,
Missed a side.
I guess. Sorry.
Missed a side.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Alana.
My name's Alana DeGroot, and I am here representing a new group that's just formed called Pesticide Free Ann Arbor. We're partnering with Be Safe Ann Arbor as well.
Closer to the microphone to make sure. That one
Is
right
that
there.
one?
We're
Yes.
partnering with Be Safe Ann Arbor, as well as some of the citizens who worked to stop the Washtenaw County Roads Commission from spraying the county roadways. And so we're kind of starting this new group, and with the mission to educate our fellow community members about the dangers of pesticides and lawn chemicals. And we're hoping to, while we're kind of focusing on private property and businesses and schools and institutions and U of M, we're hoping to partner with City Council and the Environmental Commission and kind of see where we could maybe form some kind of alliance or get some kind of official support from you, even if it's just kind of in the form of a resolution. So we are currently working with Ann Bannister on a resolution that would basically kind of say these are Ann Arbor city policies for the use of pesticides and herbicides. We know we already have pretty progressive policies, and so we would like to just kind of get that formalized in some way so that we can then present that to other institutions and the University of Michigan and kind of say this is where we officially stand. So there will be I think the resolution is on the agenda, but we're going to take some more time with it and kind of figure out more which direction we want to go and kind of how the city could help us with that. And we're hoping to maybe get on the official agenda later on. I think, Steve, you said that we could possibly get on in December and maybe have like a longer format to talk about pesticides too. So I think that's it for now, but thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. So this is finally it for public commentary number one. Again, we'll have a public commentary period at the end of the meeting. So unfinished business. Let's see, do we have any unfinished business? I don't believe we do. So let's move on to new business. The first item on the agenda is a presentation to Recycle Ann Arbor, where Missy Stultz will be presenting something.
Okay.
So I think you all know that we run a grant program called Sustaining Ann Arbor Together, which is a program that helps any citizen, nonprofit, neighborhood association that's doing something to enhance sustainability to get the resources they need to help kind of move us all collectively forward. And last year, we were able to squeeze in Recycle Ann Arbor with a program, but we didn't have a really good chance to celebrate that. So we thought we would do it tonight in the vein of talking about solid waste. Why not? So I'm delighted to have Eric here. She's going to tell you a bit about the program. But congratulations, this is for you. You already got your check, though, so don't worry, everybody. The check has already been handed off, the grant award.
All right.
This is for a redo of a recycling guide, kind of getting to a zero waste guide for the community. So congratulations, thank you, and tell us about it.
All right, I hope you're happy with our progress. I put together, I know you have a packed agenda today, so I put together a pretty brief overview of what this project is and what's been done. We began this work in, let me see. All right, so here we are. So we began this work in May, and so to date, we have a good deal of it done. So basically, you may or may not be familiar with Recycle Ann Arbor's A to Z recycling guide, but what it is it was launched in January of 2016, and it is a searchable database of 280 pages of items that include instructions for each item on where you can recycle or reuse these items, or where you can properly dispose of them in the case of home toxics. These results are, they pertain to the services offered by Recycle Ann Arbor exclusively. Since its launch in 2016, this guide is the #1 reason that people come to recycleannarbor.org, and it has thousands upon thousands of users per month. It has virtually unlimited capacity to build out. So given that is, it's a smart tool that has this capacity, I think it was here at this very commission where John Mursky brought up this A to Z guide back in maybe November of the previous year, this idea of expanding this guide to a zero waste guide and including services beyond what Recycle Ann Arbor exclusively offers. And he brought that idea to Recycle Ann Arbor, and we were thrilled by it. I was thrilled by it. So we began this project. The project is a truly collaborative project with volunteers, many of which are in this room tonight. I need to recognize the hard work of John Mursky, Steve Brown, Bridget Bauer, Lisa Spitz, and Carlton Mundis, and who am I forgetting?
Nancy Stone.
Nancy Stone, yes, who I walked in with. Sorry, Nancy. My nerves got the best of me there. Yes, and so this group of passionate citizens plus a few Recycle Ann Arbor staff put aside a lot of time to first analyze all of the pages of this guide and write up and do research on recycle right tips, because as we all know, contamination is a problem in the industry. So tips per 280 pages of how to recycle these items right, and zero waste tips on how to reduce the use of these items altogether. And that piece has been executed. It was divided amongst the team, and Bridget Bauer has updated all 280 of those pages. Yesterday was her last day before she returns to the MSU James Madison Residential College, and this project wouldn't have been possible without her. The second step was to add compost items. This was more complicated, and we had to do some web development. That web development has been completed. The compost items are in the guide. I have a final step to just add some instructions about curbside compost, and then we need to add the drop-off compost, which is a smaller amount of items next. We also added a feedback form on every single page of the guide where people can go to it and they don't see what they're looking for, they still have a question, they can immediately email that information and I get that in my inbox. It was launched a couple weeks ago and many people are already using it. Some people are using it instead of calling to find out what they can recycle. And then the last two parts of the project were to create an embeddable version of the A to Z guide that we could gift to the city and the county to go on their websites. and a Google AdWords campaign to drive more traffic to the website. And I'll get to that in a second. So what's been accomplished, I already spoke to much of that. So the 280 pages have been assessed, and the information has been updated. The compost content has been curated. We worked with Jennifer Petoskey at the city and Don at We Care to come up with that list. And the feedback form has been launched and is in use. We have this here, if you see on the screen, this is what the embeddable guide will look like, and it is ready to gift to the city and to the county. And our web developers that we contract with are willing to support the embed of that with to make sure it works properly with the different open source software or software that the city and county may be using. And then we had initial meetings. I had initial meetings yesterday. We work with EMU's digital marketing professors to have student groups at EMU run Google. We have a Google Ads grant. And so this semester, starting in the fall, we will have a team of grad students in the integrated marketing communications team that will be developing the Google ad campaign for our A to Z guide, and as well as a social media toolkit to go with that too. So that was just kind of developed yesterday, and it was pretty exciting. Another piece that we developed along the way that was an added benefit, wasn't really in the plan, is we developed a way to track and collect every single item that people type into that search field. And so people are using it by the thousands in a week, and I have all of those search terms. So I can see trends of what people are looking for and where they're coming from, which is pretty exciting. So what's next is the social media toolkit, the ad campaign, and getting that guide embedded at the county and the city's website if they so choose. So I thought that if you have any questions, you could ask them, but I just would, again, be remiss to not appreciate the people that put in a lot of time to make this project be very successful in pretty short amount of time. So, and we hope to have a phase 2 of this project at a later date. Could be something like developing iPhone apps, or adding organizations like the University of Michigan and other areas around the community and their recycling rules. So, thanks.
All right, well, thank you very much.
All right.
Well done.
Yep. Well done.
I'm going to check
Yep.
this.
It's been a great resource to me over the last 22 years since I've moved here.
Yeah, good.
So the next item on the agenda is the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan draft and the PowerPoint presentation to the Environmental Commissioner. Mm-hmm. Yep. So Christina? Or Crescent, yep. Okay.
Which is the view? Is that the one I want? There. No, the one that says view.
Full screen.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Chair Brown. Good evening, Commission. My name is Kristen Slaton with the City of Ann Arbor Public Services area, the manager and lead for the Solid Waste Resources Management Plan that's been underway for a bit over a year. Along with me tonight, first just introductions. Along with me, Craig Hupy, my boss, the Public Services Administrator, and all of our bosses, Howard Lazarus, who's also been very involved with the project, along with Missy Stoltz, part of our team. Looking around, Molly Maciejewski isn't back. Charlie Fleetum, who is part of the consultant team, has led the facilitation of the process. And then Christina Siebert, our project manager from Aptum, the lead consultant, who's going to come up and take over for me in a little bit. But I'm going to do the introductory portion of the presentation, turn it over to Christina, and then come back and wrap up. And actually one thing, though, too, in advance, the item that was read by Mr. McMurtry, that staff received a copy of that, and so I'm prepared to touch on those bullet points
after the end of the presentation. So I'll come up, kind of close that, go through those items before we turn it over for open questions and discussions, really, of the presentation and the items as a whole.
Okay.
So with that, I will move us through that. Our team last came to the commission in April this spring. Gave an update of the project, and things were going on. So what's been done since then? We've completed the draft report. Was the initial draft prepared by the consultant team, reviewed back and forth with staff. That was then shared with our project advisory committee and as part of the packet here with the commission. And a fifth meeting of the advisory commission, an added meeting, was authorized and approved by city council. That had been requested by the committee at our fourth meeting to meet one more time around the plan itself. So that meeting was held last week, and that also completes our public engagement task for the project. So through this effort, what have we produced? What have we got with us and moving forward? So we have asked for, as part of the scope, key item, and have received a financial model. A lot of concerns from the commission, from the community, from staff revolve around the finances and the health of the solid waste fund, the program, and the desire for added programs, but also the matter of how do we fund those. So we now have a financial model which has been developed, which was established and used for the cost of service analysis and was based on actual fiscal year 18 costs. So that's based on real numbers and is a tool in developing the plan, but also a tool left with the city as items get implemented for us moving forward. And in addition, the plan itself, a total of 24 recommendations as described here on the slide. 20 recommendations in 5 areas, aspects of the program, 3 related to funding for the solid waste programs, and an item related to quite a large savings potential that came out of the cost of service analysis that was discovered there. And of course, we'll be talking about that. So questions around this plan, especially compared to other plans the city has done and other plans, folks like yourself and other boards and groups and even departments in the city. This plan was not, as the slide says, your traditional strategic plan with talking and setting goals and then working down on those. The city has solid waste goals that are a part of the city's sustainability framework that have been adopted by council that were culled and pulled from past plans, and those goals are still valid. What this plan is looking to do is set up those actions and things and programs to move us forward through those goals. So while this plan did not develop goals, our feeling is those goals are still valid, and this is going to help us move and advance them. And to actually explain the graphic here is really part of the reason and validation for even that scope of looking at those actions and programs that right with initial feedback through stakeholder interviews, focus group with downtown business interests, and actually our visioning session with you folks last August at the start of this meeting. Yes, there were talks of, yes, that 1,000-foot high in the atmosphere items of zero waste goals, getting Ann Arbor back as leaders, but at that same time, there are a lot of items as we have here. We got issues with trash and student move in, move out. We had a major item at the business focus group of a business owner, furniture store in the downtown, of flies on their inventory as a result of the programs, and that the programs needed improvement in their service delivery. And so that validated for us as the team that scope of looking at those programs and how do we move forward with those. Some other activities that have been going on that we've actually talked with you folks about, and also been talking with others even outside of the city that are related but parallel to this process. Regional collaboration. There's been work through the county and their solid waste plan amendment, which again led early. Oh, my 3 minutes are up, Emily. I'm done.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry.
I got to keep going. Okay. All right, I'll keep going. But before our plan started, the county was amending their solid waste plan. The city participated in that. The staff represented as a municipal representative on that committee. And One of the recommendations out of that was regional collaboration. So there have been a lot of efforts with that. And in fact, the county staff lead person on that, Dio Egermont, was a part of our advisory committee. So we kept folks up to speed on that. The City MRF and recyclables processing, well, no, it's been talked about, that's been an issue, and focus both around this project and even a part of it, which we'll get to later. But also just to point out that actually it was our situation with the MRF that was a foundational item for that talk with regionalization. And that's stated in the report that RRS, the consultant for the county on looking at regionalization, stated that's one of the key foundations to get us started in that. So if you want to look at that silver lining, if you will. And the drop-off station replacement and options. Again, because that was mentioned with Mr. McMurtry's item, and I want to get to the meat of this, but I'll come back to kind of discuss how these things, though outside the core of the project, but they are related, but those really have been handled and dealt with out in the regional aspect. And again, those views, working with the county and their consultants and studies of those as a system. And actually for those that, oh, it was on the slide, what WARMA was, so I don't have to do that. So some of the cost impacts or effects of those parallel items, just to provide that, and I know there's questions and people wondering about that. So on the regional collaboration, that's an effort that's just getting off the ground. It's this new authority, WARMA, is being formed, and so it's an initial member commitment of $5,000 that those communities that have joined are contributing to that, and that amount is being matched by the county. So that would have been the initial investment or cost for us on that. But depending on the direction of where that body goes in the future, those costs, of course, would be subject to change based on where they go with the activities that they're taking. On the city MRFs and recyclables, again, a lot of concerns, a lot of discussion, and again, we'll get into some of that later, but in terms of the costs involved with the transport of recyclables by not processing our recyclables here directly locally. And yes, that does have impacts, but also an impact globally through recycling is also the impacts of commodity markets. And again, we can have a whole session on that, but we'll touch on that in a bit as well. And then, again, that drop-off station replacement options, that those costs, and that item has been on the radar. That's been in our capital improvements plan for a number of years. As it's called out in the plan, we're looking for partners, and it is actually serving as a regional facility. Only half of the customers that use the facility are from the city. The other half are outside the city from the region, and so that's long been seen as a regional facility and funded and approached that way. And in fact, that was a recommendation, again, back to another study from RS for the county, that should be done and funded through the county or an authority such as WARMA that's being formed. So just to provide a little snapshot and insight and really visual of the recyclable markets, the commodity markets, and really what's happened over the last 2 years. And so this is for us, this is data from our material revenues and the contracts that we have with Recycle Ann Arbor for processing. But the key here too is the shaded area. Those are actual numbers were brought into the financial model, that FY18, and the cost of service analysis and the model. So we're really representing what happens through that. And as you can see, things have started to taper a bit and slow, but they are still dropping. So it is something certainly that factors in to programs. But I would anticipate it. Things are going to rebound, but the big, huge question is when. And so with that, I'm going to turn things, oh, nope, this was still mine, sorry. One slide too early. So goals of the Solid Waste Resources Master Plan, or SHRIMP. I'm still not happy with that acronym, but I've come to call it the SHRIMP. So our objective, and literally from our scope of work put in the RFP and built into the contract, was we were looking for a strategic approach to provide effective solid waste area services and programs that the community needs and wants. What is it that they desire, but also cognizant of that it has to be done in a financially sustainable manner. So that's pulled right from our documents of what we are looking for, and we feel we've we've got that here with the plan, looking at those service areas and programs. Now, and as I said earlier in the opening, those goals from the sustainability framework are still there. They're still valid. We're not discounting them, we're not ignoring them. But this plan, the recommendations out of it, and those as they get implemented, when they get implemented, those can be the foundation for coming back and moving forward to where are those goals being advanced, and building on that to perhaps lead a full Vision Zero plan or other desires of the commission. And so with that, now I will turn it over to Christina.
Thank you. Good evening. So Kristen's talked about the public engagement that went into this process. We talked about it with you previously, both the times we've been with you. Public engagement is a really important piece of community-level planning. Obviously, developing a plan that doesn't take into consideration the users or the customers that are going to be affected by that plan really results in a document that typically will sit on a shelf. So as a result, the city sought robust community engagement throughout this process, and we have completed several tasks that provide that type of engagement. So we've laid those all out here. Really through this, we built from the interviews that were one-on-one into focus group with the downtown businesses and then into the broader advisory committee, an understanding of the needs and the interests of the stakeholders and the members of the community, and then the vision overall of the community, which has been well established through your sustainability framework, and funneled all of that down into the set of 24 recommendations that are in the plan today. There were a number of different meetings. There were more than 60 participants in our advisory committee meetings. We've gotten broad representation through all that process. And we supplemented all of that with a resident survey that provided input from 400 members of the community at large, people who typically probably aren't showing up to meetings like this. They're not paying attention really to a lot of things going on at City Council, but they're the real users of your programs, and their input is valuable. And so we asked them questions about their satisfaction, and we asked them questions about their interest in other programs, and that's all brought in that development of recommendations. We also had some unofficial and informal discussions with members of the community outside of the process that all have fed into this analysis that we have completed. So with the presentation to the advisory committee last week, we had very clear support for many of the recommendations that are in the plan. There was verbalized support from those committee members. There was written support on several of the recommendations. And there was opposition voiced to one recommendation, and that's on the consolidation of residential services all to in-house city crews. And that was voiced by about 6 or 10 participants within that process, within that meeting. So we want to take a little time right now to go through what the justifications are for the inclusion of that as a recommendation in the plan and the calculation of the cost savings, because there have been questions around that. So in broad terms, the rationale is that there was an interest from the community and from stakeholders in streamlining services. There's confusion around who provides services in a lot of different areas. There are several different contractors and service providers that are collecting within the city. So one way to streamline services is to consolidate within a certain sector, within a customer base, to who is providing that service and bring it down to one provider. That also provides one point of contact for the resident or for the business, whichever type of consolidation we're looking at. That also provides a service efficiency, and that's very important for the purposes of keeping the operation as efficient as possible for staffing, for equipment. When we're talking about residential services, it's the same truck, same type of truck, the same type of container, the same repair and maintenance needs, the same route that is being run, regardless of whether you're picking up trash or picking up compost or picking up recyclables. By bringing all of that under one provider, the city already has knowledge of those routes. They have knowledge of the equipment. They have knowledge of the customers, and they're now being able to utilize their staff in cross roles when needed to cover vacations or sick time. They're able to use the fleet in cross purposes. If there is a piece of equipment that goes down, if they have a truck that goes out of service unexpectedly, they can draw from that existing fleet and be able to supplement all of their operations effectively. And through the structure of the current contract, there's an incentive to have more carts on the street than may possibly be warranted. Multifamily properties oftentimes are served by recycling carts while they have trash dumpsters. I've seen it myself being in town on collection days and driving past a multifamily apartment complex and seeing 20 or 30 carts that are set out curbside to be collected when really a couple of dumpsters would probably be best served, but the city provides the dumpster collection now. Recycle Ann Arbor provides the cart collection, and they're paid for the collection on the number of carts that they are collecting. Another reason that we looked at this is it's consistent with what other communities do. We've heard comments that the alignment by stream is something that's done in many communities and that it provides a high value. We did the research. We don't see that happening. In fact, the high diversion communities that we've looked at, those being Madison, Wisconsin, San Francisco, Seattle, they all have a single provider for all of their residential collection services. Zero waste goal communities like Austin and Boulder also have that service provided by a single provider, whether it's trash, recycling, or compost, to a single customer. They see efficiencies in that. And the reason that we really have strived to keep this in is there's a significant cost savings that we've identified through this. $775,000 in the first year. That can help to support the costs of other recommendations. It can also allow the focus to be placed more appropriately on the education and outreach to make sure we're getting the high quality of materials into those carts and getting materials into the right place, instead of focusing on providing service through the pickup of a cart and emptying it into a truck and driving to the next stop. So just to walk through the cost savings, and we're going to focus first on the labor, because this is really where the significant difference comes in the costs. Under the city's current structure, with their contract with Recycle Ann Arbor is paid on a cost per lift. So for every cart that they pick up, they receive a fee per month of, at the time of the cost of service study, was $4 per cart. They also receive an incentive payment of $18.74 per ton of recyclables picked up. When you look at the number of carts they're serving, it's $4.49 for each of those lifts. That covers their labor, the cost of labor, and obviously includes their supervision of those routes. But the city provides the trucks, the city maintains the trucks, and the city provides the fuel. So there's an added cost that goes on top of that $4.49. When we did the cost of service analysis, we have information now on what the city's cost is to collect, and the trash collection is serving the same customers, it's using the same equipment, it's providing the exact identical service at a cost of $2.44 per cart. So we're saving $2.05 per cart on the trash collection compared to the recycling collection, and that's savings that would carry over if the city is performing that recycling collection in-house. Just real quick to show you how the Recycle Ann Arbor invoice looks when it comes to the city. There are a number of different areas that they have included in their curbside contract. But items 1 and 2, the number of carts and the price paid per cart, and then that tonnage incentive and the cost paid per ton that's collected, those are what go into the recycling collection cost. The other items are all items that, while they're within the contract from RAA, get assigned to other cost areas within the city's financial reporting. So when we're talking about comparing these different numbers, these services aren't part of that savings calculation. Those other services include business customer education and support when they have a new business customer that they sign up. It includes special event services. It includes a maintenance reimbursement. So if Recycle Ann Arbor performs maintenance on the trucks that are the city's trucks, they then bill that back to the city, and the city logs that as a maintenance expense for the fleet. And then there's other adjustments for services like parks recycling collection, multiple tips at parks, and any cart purchases that factor into that cost as well. So when we roll everything together, this chart here shows the comparison of current costs versus the future costs, with RAA as the current provider and the city as the future provider. And working from the bottom of the graph, we've got the fleet cost in orange, we've got repair and maintenance in the dark gray, we've got fuel in light gray, and then we have that labor component in red. And again, we see that most of those costs are very similar. You know, we're coming out $1 million on the RAA contract currently, slightly lower than that on city-provided service. And that gain comes from reduced repair and maintenance costs, because if the city can internalize the repair and maintenance costs, it's going to be consistent with their trash maintenance of those vehicles. They have efficiencies by performing that maintenance themselves. And then we've got the labor component. So all of that works out to about $1 million in savings just on recycling collection. And where we have this recommendation coming down to a savings of $775,000 is because we also acknowledged that as time has passed, the city has changed its staffing for its compost collection services from a temporary staffing for many of their drivers to a regular full-time staffing for those drivers, and that carries a higher cost. So we did offset it with that higher cost as an acknowledgement that there are changes happening within this area. So I want to step it back to the higher level now of the plan itself and talk about what we've got within it was 200 or so page document that was sent to you. The whole document with all of the complete attachments is over 400 pages. The two really big tools that came out of this that the city was looking for and that are going to really provide a lot of guidance, I think, going forward was the cost of service analysis that we talked about in April, which talks about, based on current costs, actual costs, what the cost is per function, and how we get to the different costs for each of these different services. So we can see where there's a higher labor cost or a higher fleet cost, or where disposal and processing costs come in. The second piece, which we didn't have ready at that meeting, and we can show you today, is the financial model. And as Kristen talked about, this financial model really is going to be a tool for the staff to use going forward, not only as we have evaluated the options here and look at what the impacts are to the fund balance, but it's a living Excel-based tool that will be able to be updated and adjusted as actual costs can be reflected for the ongoing fiscal years, and as we revise or refine some of the numbers associated with some of these options because we get more information. And then we can compare all of those costs back to our baseline or our current condition. That allows us to see where do we need to add revenue in order to support programs, where are we going to see unexpected or better be able to anticipate hits to the fund balance over time. So to quickly walk through what the financial model looks like, each of the components of the model is shown on the next couple of slides, and the first component is the tonnage component. So the tonnage breaks out by the residential streams, the waste, the recycling, and the organics, and same for commercial. And we've held those numbers consistent and flat because the tonnage in the city has been fairly flat over the past 5 years. But as we see changes in that, if there are increases or decreases in the overall tonnage produced, that can be changed, and then it will roll through the remainder of the model to adjust cost calculations. The next piece is the per ton disposal or processing fees. That's tied to the contracts that the city has for transfer and disposal, for the recyclables processing, and for compost. Again, as those tonnage amounts above change, or as the contract amounts that get paid change, it's going to change what the city has to pay for those components. The third piece are the revenues. So revenues include the solid waste millage, which is the primary component of revenue, the commercial waste fees that are paid by commercial customers, and then recycling processing credits, that's the revenue. So that was the line that Kristen showed you that has been sliding down and has decreased over time. And with that particular component, we actually did reflect the actuals for fiscal year 19 because there was a significant decrease from fiscal 18 to 19 in those revenues, so that the model going forward is based off of a lower base of revenue than would have otherwise been implied. We know that one was quite different, and so we made that adjustment. And then the other types of revenues includes royalties from the transfer station for third-party material, the sale of compost at the compost facility, things like that. So the fourth component then are the expenses by each of those different functional areas, broken out to the collection costs, the transfer or disposal or processing costs, and then the administrative allocation that went to each of those areas. The fiscal year 18 values there are based straight out of the cost of service analysis, and the Excel model has the collection components rolled up for purposes of the presentation within the plan, but you can unhide those rows and see each of the different components, the labor, the fleet, the repair and maintenance, the fuel. So again, as those change, we can keep this updated. Staff can update it with current fiscal year data. And then the fifth component is, at the end of all of it, What's our net operating surplus or deficit in a given year? So we'll look at the revenue versus the operating cost and calculate that. After that operating surplus is looked at, then we have the financial adjustments. The financial adjustments are things like pension benefits, retiree benefits that have to be factored in. Those are adjustments that happen from year to year. We have changes in landfill liability, changes in asset value. Again, these are all costs that hit the fund, but they're not direct operating costs. And then we have capital projects. So these are planned projects that would be in the city's SIP. Things like replacement of the compost pad. You'll see in the full version of the model that we've got costs in there for the drop-off station replacement and the timing at which those are planned. Then after that, we can calculate the fund balance. So for each year, we have a beginning and an ending fund balance. So the fund balance calculation takes into account both that net operating surplus amount as well as all those financial adjustments and capital projects. And then the final component is a cost analysis by program for residential and for commercial. So within that program cost analysis, we're looking at what are the revenues that are coming from just that portion of the community, what are the expenses that are associated with serving that portion of the community, and what is their operating surplus, their operating deficit. And then for residential customers, what does that equate to on a household basis? So that we can see, are we generating enough revenue to cover our costs for that particular sector, or are we generating something surplus and therefore subsidizing some other, either the other portion of city operations, or we've got a net deficit, or however that compares. For the recommendation scenarios, we have a couple of additional things that you can see. You can see the program additions. So we built in what the collection costs and transfer disposal costs would be, or processing costs would be for each of those different options. Again, calculate the fund balance impact of that option then. And then we have a comparison of the direct cost versus the baseline, or those current conditions. And that's where we should see at number 3, that direct cost change versus the baseline. And then for the residential customers, it's that change in the deficit per household from the baseline. So we can see, are we increasing our costs? Are we decreasing our costs? What's our overall impact? Are we getting back to neutral, or are we getting further from neutral? So I'm going to go through the recommendations in a very high level. I think we've talked about them a lot in the previous meeting, and you've probably hopefully had a chance to read through them. But I wanted to just hit, what were the key drivers for each of these different recommendations? In the residential sector, it was really building on the existing programs, the existing services, the existing infrastructure. The city has a very comprehensive suite of programs for the residential sector. It's a matter of getting people to use them and use them to their full benefit, and optimizing that infrastructure that will really start to move the needle further on the diversion from the residents. In the commercial sector, we know that there are businesses that are not participating in the city program as they're supposed to be. They may be served by a different trash hauler. They may not be participating in recycling at all. They're not in compliance with the city's ordinances. So that was a major driver on the commercial side. How do we get everyone participating and contributing to the system? And then second, how do we increase diversion, whether that's just through getting them into those programs that exist now, or do we need to add services? And then the alleys, downtown area, was a significant specific focus for the plan. How do we improve the conditions in the alleys? How do we improve the appearance of the alleys related to solid waste management? And we've come up with recommendations on that as well. And as we start to move towards implementation of the plan, obviously we're going to have to balance priorities. We know that we can't sacrifice the high quality of service that we have. That's a must. Waste reduction is going to have to happen if we're going to make movement towards zero waste, but it's an interest within the community to reduce our waste. But we have to balance that against the funding that we have available and the willingness of customers to pay if there's going to be an increase in funding. So with each of these, I'm going to go through the recommendations, again, just at a high level, but want to point out that for each of the recommendations, we identified the resource requirements to implement the recommendation. That's how much staff do we need, of what type, what kind of equipment do we need, what is the impact on the city's solid waste fund, what is the impact on diversion, and what are the greenhouse gas emissions impacts. And then we also identified a schedule for implementation for each of these. And that implementation schedule is built based on timing of contracts that currently exist that will be expiring and needing to replace those or have services in place to continue serving that sector. The input of the advisory committee when we went through our ranking exercise with them and identifying what was of interest and support for high priority options there. And have identified, for each of these during the planning period, how we can implement them. Every recommendation is marked on that implementation schedule for implementation during the planning period. We don't have anything that we've identified that we said, nope, it should wait until sometime after 2023. Again, that's conditioned on being able to identify funding to cover some of these options that may carry an increase in cost. So on the residential side, we've talked about the consolidated residential collection. Year-round compost collection, I think, is something that we've heard for a long time, going back to when we worked on the organics plan, is of interest. We've got it all costed out, and I think that it's reasonable, particularly with the savings that you'd be able to achieve. The residential options could be all implemented and still have savings left over based on that savings option. On the commercial side, we have options for fog management, fats, oils, and grease. That's something that's been important within the downtown in particular. Commercial organics, the student move-in and move-out support. And we had some opposition to the student move-in and move-out support because it's a small focus within the community, or a small portion of the community that's impacted. And there was less priority placed on this by the advisory committee. We've set that up as a nearer term implementation because the city's doing it now. They did it in response to the demand from council to provide the service. They did it in the spring, and they are now in the process of doing it during the fall move-in period, along the same structure as what's being recommended in the plan. Commercial participation enforcement, that was a top priority. That's making sure everybody gets into the system. That carries a high price tag. What we don't have built into that is the revenue that would be received from bringing in customers who aren't currently part of the system. And we didn't do that because we don't know what level of service they have yet. Education and outreach, we've heard consistently is a need. A great way to approach this, and what we identified by looking at peer communities, is to have a lead point of responsibility for education and outreach that's on the city staff. And that person should be somebody who has a community-based social marketing background that brings the ideas of how to speak to the community, how to reach the community, how to motivate them. They don't need to be a content area expert, although it probably would be nice to have some municipal utility type background and understanding, but they need to have the knowledge of how to work with the community and drive that behavior change. For these options, we didn't identify the diversion impact or the greenhouse gas emissions impact. There's a lot more information that would have to be collected of actual performance of the implementation. Most communities, and in fact, we didn't identify any communities that are actively tracking the impacts of their education programs on the diversion rates. What they are tracking is the customer awareness. So they can measure, were you aware of this program before? Do you say that you were using this program? But there are so many other changes that are often happening around any education and outreach effort that they can't segregate what is a change in program impact versus an education-specific impact. On the downtown, it's no secret to anybody that downtown has been an issue. You have a very busy and thriving downtown. Along with that comes a lot of material that has to get managed in small spaces. And one of the things that was immediately apparent was a higher level of service was needed there. And when are those areas the busiest? On the weekends, when the trash and the recycling isn't collected right now. So that's the first recommendation, is to get a mandatory collection in place for the weekends for those restaurants and bars that are the busiest during that period of time. That should remove a number of carts from those alleys, because the carts are matched to the demand at the peak. And if the peak is, I get my last pickup on Friday morning, and I'm not getting another pickup until Monday, I have to bridge Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. So if we can at least cut that maybe in half, you're going to see a lot of carts that will no longer be needed, and that will immediately have an impact on that appearance downtown. The second piece that we're looking at there is, let's consolidate containers where we can. Let's make sure that everybody's contributing equally. We're not getting anybody that is freeloading off of their neighbor's container, and let's consolidate to larger containers, taking up a smaller amount of space and be more efficient in this service. And then the final two areas that we have recommendations within is the diversion-related facilities and the funding. Diversion-related facilities, this is related to the drop-off station replacement and the city MRF operator procurement. Both of those are, as Kristen talked about, kind of ancillary pieces to this plan. They weren't directly looked at within the plan, but we do speak to continuing to move those forward within the context of other activities that have been happening. On the funding, we've identified options that would include increasing the millage and identifying in the plan how to achieve that increase in the millage, as well as the resulting funding that could be generated if it was returned back to its full allowable level. It would require a vote from the public. Probably is a significant effort to do the legwork to bring that about, where we can get some cost savings and efficiencies in advance of that, or implement other user fees that would be specific to services, would be more preferable in terms of the ease of implementation. A second option would be a waste diversion surcharge. This would need to be looked at to determine the city's legal authority to impose it. But because the recycling component in particular carries a higher cost for many of the areas of operation, and because it is not a service that is charged a fee now to commercial businesses, there would be a logic to applying that waste diversion surcharge to customers, whether it's just residents, just businesses, or possibly both, and is being done in other communities. Austin has it in place, and they've been able to support the growth of their programs through that. And then service fees. Those are kind of an as needed, based on what other recommendations are implemented. And those service fees could be, $25 for a bulk item, $100 for an extra pickup during student move in, move out, and the information is in the plan to be able to identify what those would be. So finally, favorite topic, what's the fund balance? What's the fund balance impact? How does our fund balance look? Are we going to have money? The financial model does calculate the fund balance projections for each of the different recommendations, and we did not build any added revenue into that model. It's very easy to add an additional line to the model that would reflect additional revenue, but we didn't do that because we didn't want to lose sight of the cost impact. There are some recommendations that would naturally result in increased revenue, like the commercial participation enforcement, that would offset a portion of those cost increases. We think on that particular option, it would probably offset about half of the cost increase there. So what we've shown in the graph, the orange line in the graph is your fund balance projection through fiscal year 2024 based on current conditions as of FY18. And so you see you've got kind of a stabilization compared to where it's been the last few years. You've had some bigger hits that were one-time adjustments that happened prior to fiscal 18, but things have started to stabilize. The blue line shows what would happen to that fund balance if we were to implement the recommendations that are identified for implementation through fiscal year 21. Again, not factoring in any added revenue that would have come along with that. And we see it's about $1 million per year that's starting to break away. So in order to implement everything within that time frame, we're going to have to achieve some additional revenue or a greater amount of cost savings than have already been identified, which could come through a new recyclables processing contract, which is currently being sought, that could have a lower cost. So I guess that would be like my last point on this, is that those fund balance projections are based on those current recycling processing costs and also the city MRF related costs. There is the potential, because the city MRF is not operating currently and the equipment that is sitting there is still on the city's books and has not been fully depreciated, that there could be a adjustment required to the fund balance at some point in time in the future that would write off the remaining value of that equipment. Maybe around $2 million, could be as much as $6 million if it was the entire facility, including the building. That is a determination that gets made by finance. But it is something to definitely be mindful of as we're thinking about implementation items. It's either factored in over the course of time through a smooth, consistent year-to-year depreciation, but that depreciation lasts for 40 years. If it happens at a one-time hit, it will be a one-time adjustment that would then, have that shift in the balance. And that we can't forecast when that would occur from our standpoint. So with that, I think I'm going to have Kristen come up and say a few more things.
Thank you, Christina. So the last item, really moving from here, how do we move from this plan? What are the next steps involved in the overall process and to action? So we're here with you folks tonight, presenting the final draft plan. And September 9th, council work session, a topic of the session is solid waste is the broad topic. This plan, the recommendations are definitely going to be a key aspect of it, as well as an update and background, more detailed background information for the council on the WARMA authority and how these things all interact and interrelate, and other solid waste updates in general. And then, as Christina's mentioned, I've probably touched on some of the near-term implementations that touch on with the recommendations, but just really getting down to brass tacks. We've got contracts that are in place listed here for the recyclables processing and operating the MRF process, our commercial franchise collections of trash, and the current contract with Recycling Arbor on recycling curb collections, curb cut collections are expiring. So movement and action clearly needs to be done on those. And as noted, we've got a recommendation for change in that service. So we're going to need some clear direction from ultimately City Council as the deciding factor, but on those items as well, and approval of contracts to replace these items. So that wraps up the presentation as it is, as we put together. And as I mentioned at the start, though, I would like to, because I know this was shared with the commission and some points that have been raised that Mr. McMurtry presented. So just, I think we touched on a number of them here, but just to add some quick context to background for you folks. The first item in terms of the crisis in the solid waste system and our recycling infrastructure, the MRF and the drop-off station. Hopefully you've heard, we agree those are items that need to be addressed and have been done on our plate to do. And in fact, in terms of the MRF and the processing, trying to see what to do with our facility, at the start of, a quick reminder actually, at the start of our project as a separate task with Aptum was to help staff develop RFPs for the contracts we just mentioned. Those were set to expire this past June. So we knew we needed to replace those, and we began working on replacement RFPs, including one for the processing for recyclables. And actually, at one point, we were thinking, do we combine that with the collections early on in the process? But at our first advisory committee meeting, a subset of the committee said, well, why are you going out with RFPs if you haven't done this plan and figured out what the recommendations are? You shouldn't go ahead. And then, in fact, at the December 6th meeting of the commission, you folks passed a resolution saying, yeah, that's right, we should wait for the plan to go. And so we backed off, and we've waited for the plan to be completed. So now as the plan's being completed, and I believe Christina did mention, but to add a bit more detail, staff has issued an RFP for the MRF operations for sorting and taking our recyclables back to market. And we're looking for options from the proposers, providing two specific options. One, do you want to continue the use of the facility as a transloading operation, taking it to another MRF facility? But here we're going to ask for specific information of where that process is, where it's located, so that we can do an apples-to-apples comparison. I know I've heard it, tired of our recyclables going to Cincinnati. Yep, so we all are. But now, how can we compare if people can come in? Is there something closer? And we'll be able to compare that. Or as a second option, and the proposers are free to propose on both, do you want to re-equip and restart, not literally because the equipment is not usable, but re-equip and begin processing at our facility? And what would it take? And what would those costs be? So again, we can have an apples-to-apples comparison and see what those costs are and to see what direction that is. But to note, as Christina mentioned, there is that point that if we do look to re-equip, there is that financial component that we're going to take some level of hit to our fund balance, and so those things would all have to be taken into account. But also, as to the drop-off station as well as the MRF, I touched on it in my opening comments, but just to add the specifics that though they weren't heavy lift items, if you will, or heavily analyzed items in this plan, that was actually on purpose because of the analysis and the work that has been done through work with the county, along with the city. That, again, I touched on it, but just want to really clarify that it's been looked at. The county had a project that the city actually participated in, again with staff, where they hired the consultant RRS to look at drop-off facilities countywide and look at it as a system. And it has a specific recommendations recognizing that we have 2 full drop-off stations in the county. Ours, as I said, really acts as a regional facility, and one out at Western Washtenaw Recycling Authority out in Chelsea. And just point out that this study was done October 30th of 2017, so well before our plan was done. And they specifically say this should be replaced, but really the capital put in by the county or an authority, a group, that it specifically said, didn't say the city should be doing it, that it's a collaborative and a regional facility. So that decision was made sense, and aligns with our capital improvements plan. So that's the reason why you don't see, and why that, just to clarify, it wasn't ignored in this plan. It's already been, direction's been set. And similarly, in terms of the MRF, as I said, we've been looking to replace that processing and the contract, but again, stepping back a bit and even broader, that actually the true discussion of a new regional authority, again, a separate study, but the county, again, commissioned from RRS, they even say that the discussions around authority and regional collaboration really were the foundation of that exploration began because of the county solid waste plan that recommended it, but also the city's situation with its MRF, that it has a potential opportunity for a broader facility. And so we've been a little judicious in not wanting to put all our eggs into that basket if there's a broader regional solution. And actually, in their document, they even say they don't know that our MRF will fit the right needs. And so it may be better used as a transloading operation or actually a big drop-off station. So those are the reasons why, to Mr. McMurtry's first point, it wasn't ignored, but has been studied outside, and we feel appropriately. The second bullet, plan abandons any role recycling collection education for RAA. I guess to start, I absolutely want to tout and commend Recycling Arbor, because the very clear fact, recycling is here, and as Christina said, because of what, and others, because of RAA. They started recycling before anybody recycled, probably anywhere, I believe, definitely in this area in the state. And so we're standing on the shoulders of those folks that started it. But what happened as really the analysis, cost of service analysis, the process, it was a discovery item, this cost savings that were potential. And I don't necessarily want to go back. Christina laid it out, I think, pretty well, and I'm sure you'll probably have some questions, but it wasn't that that was a driver going in. That was something that was discovered, and we can't ignore that seeing this contract that's been in place for some time. And also, to be clear, they're living up to their contract. We're paying them what the contract says. It's just one thing that it's a long-standing contract that it's probably seen its time. And so something new is really ready for that. And that another aspect that has weighed into this is that City Council at the start of the project weighed in and passed a resolution that the city's going to stay in the collection business, so to speak. And so that's been an item that has been factored into our process and thoughts, because council said, yep, we're not getting out at all, we're staying in, and so that's a factor with this as well. And I guess the last piece on this too, that Christina mentioned the prioritization or ranking by the advisory committee, and just as clarification or just point of information, that at our fourth advisory committee meeting, when the draft recommendations were presented to the full advisory committee, she mentioned a ranking process that was offered for the committee members. And the committee members were told, you know, please rank all these options. If you don't feel one should even be in the plan, don't vote for it. Just don't even vote. But then if you do, rank which ones should be in and give it a ranking. And in the residential area, the service consolidation actually did receive votes by more than half of the committee that were there that day. There were 26 there, and 15 actually voted for it, so saying it should be in the plan, so over half. And they gave it the second highest rating behind the year-round compost collection. So it wasn't that the whole committee was against it, but we do acknowledge that there are certainly committee members that are not for it and have concerns about it. The third item, an alternative way of consolidating services, and as mentioned, I guess just to quote, note it, in spite of many examples of high-performing communities that consolidate their services by value stream, and as Christine said, we haven't found those. So there may be some that do, but through the benchmarking exercise, I haven't found communities, and particularly the high-performing communities that divide their services along material stream. So I guess I just would take exception to the statement that many examples were given, because we haven't found them or heard of them. The next was an item that Commissioner Brown and a member of the advisory committee had put forward, an item with several items discussed that felt weren't being included in the process in the plan, and that there weren't zero waste proposals. And a key point, and we discussed this at the commission or at the committee too, that yes, we acknowledge this isn't a zero waste plan, and so those things aren't in there. But just wanted to point out that 6 of the 12 items that were in those items that felt should be considered or included are indeed included and addressed in the plan. That the plan offers no vision or goals, I think we've hopefully addressed that in the presentation in my opening remarks, that yes, new goals maybe didn't come out of this process, but we're holding by the goals that we have, and this we see as a vehicle and a tool to move us forward on those goals. And then the last, in terms of critical objections from the advisory committee were ignored. Requests for test votes were denied. I guess one, I just would take exception in terms of ignored. I mean, ignore means really cast aside, that the staff, the core team, feel truly listened and considered, which is not ignoring. But a key point, and this was recurring in quite a discussion at a couple of meetings in terms of votes by the committee. And it was quite a discussion, and if Charlie doesn't think I answer completely, he'll come up. This truly falls under his purview as the paid and professional facilitator. But a key point of this committee, this group, was it was an advisory group, that it was a group to weigh in, to provide feedback, to be part of the input in the process, to consider with the recommendations. But it was not a deciding group. And Charlie gave a great example. I won't do it half the justice, but I was part of that group where first time he worked on a project here in the city was the sanitary sewer wet weather evaluation, basically the footing drain task force and food and drain project. And city council said, you will have a citizen committee that's going to make the decisions. A very different process, a very different way to go about it. And as that facilitator, that has a different process that does include voting, but in a rigorous way and manner. And so when votes and voting over whether to include or not include, or kind of this wasn't what I said, but thumbs up, thumbs down if you will, that wasn't the right place for this. So I just wanted to provide our perspective on those things as well. And so with that, I'll turn it over to questions and discussions
Okay,
on
well,
the
thank
items, and
you.
we'll see who's best
Well, thank you,
appropriate to
Kristen.
answer them.
I was going to ask Missy if she would come up and facilitate the discussion during this part of the commission meeting. So, in the meantime, I have a question. Well, I'll start off with a comment, and that is, since I served on the advisory committee and I serve on the commission here as well, I think a major comment is that there was not enough discussion among, time available among the advisory committee during the process. It was facilitated very well, I thought. There's a lot of good information in this report. Again, it's not quite to the actionable point yet. The first question I have is, it's not clear to me what the process is going forward in terms of establishing priorities with staff and city council. Could you clarify that in a few minutes?
And I may look to perhaps Howard or Craig to correct me or misspeak, but a key aspect with first stepping back a bit in plans and process, there are certain plans with the city, and I'm putting on kind of a dusty hat when I used to work in more of the planning and land development, so I'm not sure who's the planning commission rep, so Shannon, please pardon any mistakes. But the city has a master plan, which is a specific document which lays out guidance and direction over many things in the city, but doesn't include absolutely everything in the city. So we have a master plan, and it has components. There's a land use component. Actually, our transportation plan is a component. But a solid waste plan, this is a plan, this is strategic, setting direction, giving recommendations. But my reason for kind of stepping back a bit is master plan items and elements have a very specific in terms of process, so that they have to be adopted, which is a specific term, by city council. There has to be public hearings, and so there's a set process. Here, this solid waste resource management plan is not an element of the master plan. Doesn't mean it's not valuable, it's extremely valuable, but it doesn't have that set process. So to answer your question of next steps and prioritization and implementation, that really, there's flexibility there, which is kind of that double-edged sword. By not having a set process, I can't tell you, Chair, exactly what the next steps are. From my opinion and just initial discussions, I see the ultimate approver of any implementations and perhaps even prioritization is City Council. As I touched on, any contracts, any code revisions, any staffing hires, adding of FTEs, those all have to be approved at City Council, whether it's by approving the budget, approving an ordinance, or approving a contract.
Yeah, of course.
So there's, and some of these items and the recommendations are greatly going to affect some of those things that need to be put into place to replace the contracts that are expiring. So I have to work with Craig and Howard as the administration as to how does that get presented to the city council to give that solid direction and tell us, yes, this is the direction we're going to go and into that priority. So.
To cut to the chase, we will be sharing the plan with City Council in a work session in September, and then based upon the feedback we get in that work session, we'd be turning around and bringing it back to City Council for their acceptance. And then that would become the guidance for undertaking various tasks.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Huppy. So,
Other commissioner questions?
yeah.
Commissioner Mercy?
Permit me a couple of questions at the 30,000-foot level, if I may. And I'll put them together because I see them as being bundled. I was wondering if you could summarize for me the achievements in the last solid waste plan. Who was responsible and accountable for those achievements? And I would like to also understand, there's been a statement that there are goals in the sustainability framework. I'm not aware that there are any SMART goals in the framework. There is some broad goals, but there are no SMART goals in the framework. And so thinking about what happened in the last plan, what I would like to understand is how is success defined in the new plan, and where can it be found in the plan? So that in 2023, that residents, that city leadership, that commission, residents, everybody can look back on this and say, did we have a successful plan or did we not?
So to the first item of the past, I would have to have the document in front of me to go back. But I know there were some, but one of the things as a staff and moving into this area after that plan got adopted, and looking at it, I had difficulty in answering that question of how do I go about doing it myself, because it didn't have the detail of steps to meet the goals that were included in there. And I'm going a bit by recollection because I don't have it in front of me, Commissioner Mursky, that don't have it fresh from memory. But to answer the second part in terms of how we will know, I would offer that we do have items here in terms of what's anticipated in terms of diversion, in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, and that those would be items that for which are implemented, that we would see are those targets, those anticipated items being met.
If I can just comment on that. My perspective is if this is a plan that's going to take us forward, we should have SMART goals that are outcome-based. And those were listed on the very first page of the past plan in terms of diversion rate improvements, in terms of services that were to be implemented, and as far as I know, none of the major targets were met. And so I would like to know how, again, will all of us know whether or not this is a successful plan based on what is written in the plan, not based on, you can go back to slide 8. There are some statements about goals, but none of those, to my knowledge, are really articulated in the plan itself. There are a bunch of programs listed. There are some outcomes related to each one of those individually, but there's nothing that says at 30,000 feet, we all are working towards a diversion increase from X to Y by date Z, for example.
Yep, and I'm not going to disagree that those aren't in there, but I guess I would point actually to this slide. And as I said, the goal and the purpose of this plan was to look at those programs because of concerns that were had, and I'm going to get bumped.
So, Commissioner, I'm going to be very direct.
Sure.
We have a solid waste plan where, by your own previous statements, we have a declining balance in the solid waste fund. We have a material recovery facility which has been not operating at its full capacity for 3 years because under previous operations we allowed it to get run down, and it also is a fixed facility that hasn't kept up with changes in the recycling stream. We have a desire to put in year-round organics to address food organic and grease waste in the downtown. We have a desire to improve services provided in the downtown, and we have a desire to live up to our challenge to provide high-quality services in an efficient manner. So I think those things will be measured. This plan gives us a roadmap to get there. We will wind up with a plan that allows us to maintain a healthy balance in the solid waste fund. It will allow us to maintain high levels of customer service, which is measured through various means, including the National Citizen Survey and other surveys that we take. I think it's a case of walking before you run. We have to do a lot of work from a business standpoint to get ourselves back to being an efficient, well-run organization in the solid waste area. And I think this plan was designed to help us to get there. Now, that's not throwing stones at anyone. It's not diminishing anybody's value. But we know that the solid waste field has gone through rapid change, particularly on the recycling side. This plan will help us get a strong foundation. At the same time, we still focus on being a leader in diversion and on processing and on meeting community goals.
Yeah, I have a question. So in other words, the staff is prepared to present options to council that include these elements, or, see, they're not in this report, so it's hard to tell what's going to end up.
What kind of options are you referring to?
Year-round organics collection, you mentioned that one, but there are others, like increased enforcement in the commercial area, other items. So there's a whole suite
Actually,
of recommendations.
Yeah, I guess, yes, those are recommendations saying, those are, rather than options, those are recommendations, that the plan is recommending those be implemented.
Okay.
So those will be part of that presentation at the work session.
Okay. So, yeah, I just have a general comment about the cost of service. And, I recognize that there's a lot of emotion about this because Recycle Ann Arbor has been a long-term part of the community and a valued part of the community for many residents. And there may be some perception that the Environmental Commission is really siding with Recycle Ann Arbor, but our duty is to the city itself. Now, just taking as one example, during my participation in the advisory committee, the whole discussion around consolidation of residential collections was a bit confusing at first because it wasn't clear if we were talking about residential or commercial, because there are more contracted providers commercially in the downtown. It wasn't exactly clear when you say commercial, how much of that you mean downtown. So there was some confusion at the beginning about that influenced the discussion for several months. Now, in particular, the cost of service calculations that came up again for consolidation of residential collections. The original cost saving was listed as $350,000 back in January. And there was not much data backing that number up. And so there was a question about why it wasn't really elaborated as much as some of the other things that were presented to the advisory committee at that time in January. So that resulted in some comments in April. It resulted in an extraordinary meeting that I tried to chair just to have facilitated a discussion among the advisory committee members, because there really wasn't enough time budgeted to have that. It was a very good, well-managed presentation at that time for what it was, but there just wasn't enough time left over for group discussion. And there was a cross-section. It wasn't the entire advisory committee, but there was a cross-section of people from the different communities, the different interest groups. And so then, like on August 13th, we get a revised number that calculates $800,000 savings by consolidating collection services. And it's still not exactly clear where that number came from. I think staff has really earnestly worked to provide that for several members of the commission, including me and Mr. Mursky, but it's still not clear whether we're talking about the same thing. Because what's described as labor costs, I don't want to get into too much detail here because I just want to provide this as an example of some confusion that's led to dissension, I believe, among all the members of the advisory committee and people in the commission here who have examined the process and the numbers. So I just have one more sentence, I think. And so I want to be absolutely clear that when we talk about capturing $800,000 in savings by consolidating collection services, that we're talking about a real number. Because I realize that the contract costs that you're currently under, sometimes they're classified as labor, but I don't know, but I must have a suspicion that there's some other activities that are lumped into that, and that can be for various conveniences. But I think it's not clear that the same level of recycling services, for example, could be done at $800,000 less by the city if the city just took up collections. And I'm eager to see, and I realize that we're all talking about the past here, that there will be RFPs issued, and I would personally feel more comfortable if these RFPs could could be structured in such a way that would provide, a more clear example, a more clear discussion of what parts of what proposals would cost what. That's all.
So maybe to take a little tension off right now, one of my favorite quotations comes from Oscar Wilde, and that is, a cynic is someone who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And we're really talking about value here, not just in the quality of services provided, but incorporation of community values. And as you said, there was a perception that many of the commissioners were strong advocates for Recycle Ann Arbor. I think we will all acknowledge that Recycle Ann Arbor has been a very valuable member of the community for a very long time. But there is a separation of role as an advocate and a community partner versus that as a service provider. And what we have done here is try to analyze the current contract in terms of the efficiency as a service provider. Having looked at many proposals and bids over a career that's probably longer than I'd like to admit, it's really hard to align proposals as opposed to a straight bid. And that means you have to go in, you have to understand the overhead, you have to understand allocation of cost, and everybody does it differently, so you have to line them all up. And I'll let Christina get into the nuts and bolts of that, but I think they did a good job in aligning what those costs of services are. And if there's more detail needed, I think we can certainly provide that, and certainly sit down on an individual basis if necessary to walk through how that was provided. It wasn't, as Kristen said, a desired outcome, but it is something that came up. There are some features to it that I find attractive as an administrator, particularly reducing the number of service providers and knowing who to call if someone's is missed a pickup and you only have one provider in that area. It also helps with the administration. Those are very real factors that we have to consider in running a business. On the downtown side, I think we have not been successful because we've been contracting using a very rigid schedule of services. And it doesn't have the flexibility in it that we might want. And there's certainly no mechanism currently to incorporate a customer satisfaction score as we do with Republic Parking, where part of their profit is based upon the values that they get back. And I think those are things that we can look at. That's the value of an RFP instead of an invitation for bid. And I think those things you'll see in those areas where there are a lot of concerns that we would incorporate. And it may not be the lowest price, but it would be the best value. So those are things I think as we come back and engage with the commission before we go to council to have that discussion, so there is an understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve. And we can certainly incorporate the kind of smart outcomes that John talks about in how we evaluate those proposals. So there's a lot involved in here. I know there's been confusion as the cost of service has evolved. I'll certainly let Christina talk about that. But again, as Kristen said, the intent here was not to come up with a specific number. It was to look at how we provide service and cost it out. And going forward, I think you will see things being competitively bid, so that, or at least competitively procured, so that we can get the best value in the service that we provide.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
So to go to your point, Steve, about the cost difference between the first presentation of cost savings on the consolidated residential collection and the final number that's in the plan, when we started that calculation, we were very conservative. As we do in any planning process, I think as anyone does in a financial process, as you're laying out your assumptions, your inputs, you look to a cautious side of your calculation. The numbers didn't change. We had an element that we hadn't included previously. So we had not previously included any revenue on the recycling. We took and said, we're going to use the city's approach of assuming $0 of revenue for recyclable commodities, which is how the city typically will budget for solid waste area operations. And we, by doing that, lost $440,000 off of the calculation. So when you take that $350,000, you add back the $440,000 that's achieved in recyclables revenue, we're left with that $775,000 savings. So you had the $350,000 savings plus a revenue on top of that. And it would have been, I think, optimistic to come to the commission, to the committee, and say, right off the bat, we think it's going to be $750,000 or $800,000 savings, when we hadn't back-checked and fact-checked everything. We were there to get guidance and advice, and if you remember throughout the process, we started with concept, idea, program discussions first, and we only got into dollars as we better refined what those options looked like. So we gave you the information so that you had some guidance as a frame of reference for the costs. Frankly, I'm surprised that we went from $350,000 of savings to more than double that amount of savings and faced increased opposition and dislike for an option that will help to support so many other programs for the city. We were asked to come to this commission with the truth, with the analysis, and even if you don't want to hear it, and if it's something that you're not going to like hearing, if there's something that you should be doing better or different, to tell you what that is. I think we've done that. I am here as an objective provider of the facts and the analysis. What you choose to do with it is up to you. When we talk about the calculation of the cost savings, it's a very straightforward calculation, and I would be happy to sit down with anybody and go through it, but we've got it on the slide. It's $4.49 to the city now, under the current contract, for the recycling collection. The city provides the identical service for trash collection, picking up from the same customers on the same routes with the same fleet, with drivers that are union drivers, and does that at almost half the cost. To me, there's no need to look at those numbers more closely.
Well,
So I know what I'm going to say, you know, and city staff knows, but I'll say it for the sake of fellow commissioners and those in attendance and those watching on closed circuit TV. Commissioner Brown and I spent over 2 hours with RIAA last Friday reviewing these figures, and then we spent another hour and 15 minutes with city staff and with you on Monday. And what I frankly still cannot reconcile in my head is that the difference is so big. And I will explain it as briefly as I can, and that is, based on those discussions, I know that, and this is in the public domain, it's in the cost of service analysis, and part of it is here, that the city's base wage is higher than RAA's. I know that the benefits paid on a percent of base wage are higher. So we're starting on the city side at a point where the labor cost should be higher than RAA's. Then for some reason we're ending up at a situation where, in spite of that, the cost is going to be, or the cost of RAA's is double what the city's cost is. And I frankly can't reconcile that in my head unless there are other services packed into, I'll finish, packed into RAA's analysis. If there's inefficiencies in RAA's costs that are not related to the base labor, if there are funds from the city contract that are being used to fund other things with RAA. One of the explanations that we were given was that there are more tips per household. The cost of service analysis was originally done on a per household basis, and there were more tips that were given, and that those tips are multifamily, and there are some commercial tips, and those are more difficult to get at. They take more time. Drivers have to get out of the trucks. But in order for that to lead to a doubling of cost, those would have to be at 5 times the cost per unit in order to explain the doubling of the cost. So for me, I'm just totally perplexed. And what I would just end with saying, we brought this up in the last meeting. We asked if there was a chance that we could have both parties sitting at the table to review this and have a discussion in detail, and that was not possible. So what we did instead is we met with the two parties, and frankly, still I cannot understand what the difference is coming from.
So John, the RAA contract is what I would call is a fixed unit price contract. It is a cost per service. We don't look behind the curtain to
Yep.
see what happens to the money once it gets into RAA's hands.
Correct.
You know, both parties willingly signed a contract.
Yes.
As competent parties, we agreed to that price, that's what we pay. When we look, and that's, you know, it's just, it's the cost of doing business. When we look at what it would cost the city to do it, we know what our labor rates, we know what our overhead is and our supervision, and the numbers are what the numbers are. If we were to change this and to put this, to maybe provide some context to it as well, if we were to look at doing this competitively, we could look at the city cost versus a competitive bid. But to go and talk to one particular vendor when we are looking at how to do this over the long term would give them an unfair competitive advantage as we were to go forward. Again, remember, we need to separate RAA as a community partner and an advocate from their role as a service provider. So even if we're off by a certain percentage, 25%, there's still a significant savings there. And the context behind this is we live in an environment where we're all concerned about the cost of owning a home, living in Ann Arbor. And we would be remiss in our responsibilities if we didn't bring to you an analysis that shows what the cost is on a comparative basis. And I looked through the way the apples-to-apples comparison was done. I'm comfortable with the way it was done. These are the results that came out of that analysis. Again, we don't peek behind the curtain on a fixed price type contract, so it's not our place to see how RAA spends the money once they have it. It is just, we have to live up to the terms of our agreement.
Councilmember Smith?
Oh, I just want to add one more thing. On the question about the number of carts, you'll notice that the calculation that we show here is the cost per cart. We did recalculate the city's trash number on a cost per cart basis, applied it to the number of carts that RAA is serving now. So it is an apples to apples number.
Yep.
Thanks. I appreciate the presentation and the work that's gone into this. I have a couple of questions, maybe a couple of quibbles, maybe a couple of concerns. Looking at some of the financial recommendations is, you know, looking at the two big recommendations, and I don't think this can come to council with a recommendation to say, hey, you might be able to use this fee. Like, I think it has to be, we have to know whether we can impose a diversion fee or not, first of all. Otherwise, it's a in my mind, something that doesn't have any value to us. And then also in the context of that larger financial picture, you know, saying go for a Headley override from the voters, you know, from where I sit as an elected official, if I'm asking voters for a Headley override, it's not for the solid waste fund, it's for the general fund. You know, I think I'm concerned about the strategy of both a Headley override and fees on top of that. I think when you talk to people, when you knock on doors like I do, you know, what gets people more upset than a fee, than, you know, just the cost of this going up, is the fact that it goes up in multiple different ways, and it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that, to me, is something that I know council will have a great deal of concern about, because this is what we hear from our residents.
So I think I can provide some clarity to that. That particular set of recommendations on funding, in a certain view, should be looked at as either or type of options. On the waste diversion surcharge, the recommendation states to first confirm whether the city can impose it. That was something that was going to require further effort beyond the duration of this completion of this plan. It's a precondition. I think there are certain elements of these recommendations certainly that fall to staff's responsibility before maybe bringing it to council, or seeking the input of council on their tolerance or interest in further exploring certain funding options. So if the direction from council is a Headley override sounds like a task that we're not interested in seeing you undertake, find another way. And then the question becomes, well, let's bring you the option of a waste diversion surcharge if that's something that's needed in order to provide supplemental funding. And doing the investigation and analysis research on the legal side to first answer whether that's a possibility and under what conditions that would be implemented, in order to then also tie it to a specific set of services that are being provided and specifically what those dollars are for. So there are pieces of this that it's a dynamic type of a situation when we're talking about 5 different topic areas, focus areas, and a lot of different services that push and pull on each other. But we wanted to make sure you had the information within the plan of this is what these different options do look like and how you could implement them.
And just to follow up that, I agree, the master plan, or any plan is good when it is a dynamic document. So certainly prompt, hopefully, a lively discussion at the work session, and we'll get better direction as to how council would like to proceed. As I said before, maybe a little tongue-in-cheek, it's not just about cost, it's about value, and I hope that that conversation leads to a discussion of community values, and there is a retooling after that. There are some things we need to do right away. As Kristen said, we have the RFP out for MRF operations. There's some degree of urgency in getting that done. But it's time for us to tear things apart and look at how we provide services to the community in a way that is high quality and cost efficient. And just to go on that, I think, Kristen, Craig, myself, Molly, as well as Charlie and Christina, it's a business operation as well. This is not anything that's taken personally. It is a matter of bringing things back to make sure we're serving the public the best possible way.
And please take the spirit of my questions in which they delivered that, I think these are significant concerns that everybody needs to know about before the September work session. I do have 2 other questions, if my colleagues will allow. As an elected official, we hear an awful lot of complaints about the downtown alleyways. My question, I think, Christina, is there didn't seem to be a whole lot of discussion of an idea I know that has been tossed around an awful lot by Ed Shaffron and the DDA of a special assessment district for solid waste in the downtown area. At least to me, and certainly I'm not a practitioner in the field, but it seems that this would be a more direct way to ensure participation in our programs, and it would also provide the opportunity to cover the cost of enforcement. It seems to me that if the downtown businesses are willing to do that, that would be something we might want to break out separately in this discussion.
I think I agree with that. In my discussions with Mr. Shaffron, I'm open to the discussion of a downtown solid waste management district. I told Ms. Poley that as well. And part of that discussion is as we look at what roles DDA will play in the future once their current authorization expires. That's something that we may want to look at as well. I firmly believe we ought to integrate a customer satisfaction component to how we compensate a service provider there. Christina did mention going to a smaller amount of larger containers, and therefore you don't get the cheating because everybody buys in as well. There are some other factors. Council approved an additional FTE for a solid waste enforcement officer out of the solid waste fund in the police department. And that position, until it's hired, we're going to use that to reassign some of the code or the community standards officers. So I agree with that, and we need to improve enforcement not only in the downtown, but in a meeting that I had with Mr. Ackerman and his LUM, we need to look at the near campus areas as well. So those areas have not been models of how we want to provide a service, and we need to make the changes to them, and that'll come out of this discussion as well.
I think what I'm looking for a little bit in this is a little bit stronger recommendation that this is an avenue that the city should strongly discuss. I mean, I think some of my quibbles are, while some recommendations are very strong, others not so much, and I would like some of these things, like, and I'll just, the drop-off station is, I know nobody really wants to talk about it because, we should only have a little bit of the cost, but I noticed in some of the financial modeling, there are costs built in for that. I think there needs to be a very clear statement that says this is a regional issue. We think our recommendation is you join the warm, you figure this out, you have the rest of the county buy into it. And, not seeing that as a strong recommendation in there leads me to the fact that, maybe not this council, maybe a future council can certainly say, well, that wasn't in the plan, so I don't think we should do it. And, it's little things like that seem like they're little and unimportant that I think when we discuss these, before council, it's really critical to have this information in there. If you think it's a dumb idea for us to join the regional coalition, you should say that too.
So, Councilmember Smith, I would point out on the downtown option, talking about the having a district similar to like a biz type setup to run the solid waste collection. It is referenced when we presented the option with more detail, the 2 or 3 pages on each of the different options. So it's on page 73 that we talk about it possibly being a biz model. The reason we didn't outright recommend that is there are questions about the ability to have a biz that is set up that overlaps an existing biz. And so there's a question of who would run it and can you have somebody that has overlap. If you cannot have that overlap, then you're going to end up with 2 different sets of service provision. You'll have Main Street and you'll have everything else. So we wanted to make sure there was flexibility available to the city on that. Similar on the regional authority, I think there are in a number of different recommendations, not in the recommendations themselves, but in the discussion of the options, there is discussion of the regional value. Because that's a process that's been in front of council once and not acted on, had been planned, I think, to be brought again. It's been through this commission, I think, twice with recommendation to join. There's a lot of discussion and focus on it. That's why we pointed out the things that would benefit from a regional approach. But for us to further weigh in on it, you've already done that. You've made those decisions. We're providing the further backing for that. I think did I cover everything that you had asked?
You saw it before?
No, I'll cede the floor at this point.
And yes, Commissioner Needham.
So I have a, I guess, procedural question. Am I correct in assuming that the report will go to council as written regardless of anything we do here tonight?
I think we can jointly answer this one.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Needham. Could you just restate it? Not sure that I quite caught it.
What happens to the report? Is it going to council the way it exists, the way it's written right now, no matter what we say about it?
Well, no, if there are things that the commission makes, there is a resolution provided in front of you that I'm anticipating you'll have some discussion on, and the end result of that would be factored into and taken back to see how does that affect the plan.
And I would say at a very minimum, we did mark a draft intentionally. At a very minimum, I think the fact that we've discussed whether there are goals within this plan and we've talked about the sustainability framework providing that guidance, I think it's easy enough and it's a very brief change and would be direct straight out of the sustainability framework in the prior plan to incorporate that within the context of the plan as an introduction. Those types of edits aren't significant in any manner, I don't think, for the purposes of the back and forth review and at the direction of the commission would be readily incorporated.
And I would add even to a specific in terms of Councilmember Smith's point about the recommendation being a little stronger on the drop-off station. That's something there that through some wording edits, we're not going back into the analysis and those cost-heavy things. I think that's something that certainly if that's guidance and from the commission that would be evaluated.
And the intent would be, though, to get this to the council in advance of the study session, the work session?
So the short answer is yes. I think also, though, that we would be remiss if we didn't take the recommendations and concerns from this discussion and bring them to council as well. That may wind up with us coming back to the commission again if council so directs. There are some things that I think we will tell council we need to get started on sooner rather than later, just from a contractual standpoint. But I would agree with those who say it's important to get it right, not necessarily just to get it fast.
Any other questions from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner.
is there a benefit to us waiting until there is more leadership from the regional authority?
To frame it a little bit differently, I think I don't think you're compelled to take action this evening. The work session, at a council work session, council doesn't take any definitive action either. They'll provide us with some recommendations as well. I think it'd be prudent on our part to take all of that and then make adjustments to what was presented. It may be that we come back and have another discussion before council adopts it. The concern that I do have from a business standpoint is that we do start on those critical items where we need to start procuring services, that we can do that, particularly in areas where there's not any disagreement.
Okay.
Commissioner Brown?
Maybe that I should address this to our council members. Perennially, there's a suggestion among council members to privatize collection services for this area. Is that, I assume in the plan it's well off the table, but is it clearly off the table on the council for any foreseeable future?
Yes, sir.
You can
So we were given very strong direction from council that we're not to look at outsourcing of services currently provided by city staff. It's a little bit more complicated because there's overlap of areas. So one of the things we sought to sort out is aligning the services better, but there is no intention to take residential collection and outsource it. The city staff that does it, as we've proved and as we've seen here, can do it efficiently. When we had that discussion before council, the AFSCME members were here and were very proud of the relationships they have with our residents and the way they can be responsive to that service. And I think I respect that comment as well. One of the bullets on the slides was that by adding some staff, it increases our flexibility because we don't have solid waste workers, we have operators, and they often can be reassigned to other things. Not only does that provide enhancement to service, it also provides career advancement for them within their career progression programs as well. So we're not looking at outsourcing residential collection. Our staff provides high value to the residents of this community, and it's supportive of council and the community's support of union labor.
Very good.
One of the bullets that was in the presentation tonight, I'll highlight, that says, as we align around residential services, we would be looking at adding 4 to 7 employees to the city payroll for that additional, picking up the additional work. So if anything, we're going the opposite direction of contracting out.
However, commercial services would be private?
Most of them are, I won't say all of them, they're not all private now, but I believe the bulk of them are private. Chris can talk to the percentage splits.
I guess to directly answer the question, Commissioner Graham, is there's 2 related recommendations, and the net result of the 2, recommendation to consolidate the residential collections, as we've been talking, by city staff, and consolidating the commercial collections of all the streams to a single provider, that if that's done as a contractor, the net result is through shifting of staffing assignments, pulling those staff that do commercial right today, we would still have a net add of 4 staff. That's where the range of 4 to 7 come in.
All right.
Any final questions? Chair Brown, thank you for the opportunity to facilitate.
Well, thank you, Ms. Stotts. Great job. Good job. So the next item on the agenda would be the resolution from staff on the solid waste resource management plan resolution.
I move approval for discussion.
Do you have a motion? Secondary?
Second for discussion, yeah. Do we have a copy of it, either on a screen or, the one that we have is...
Yeah, we got it.
is-
It's on Legistar, so if you have internet connected.
Yeah, I know it's on Legistar, okay.
Well,
Do you mean this one?
No, that's different. I'll pull it up.
I think.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Should we just vote on it? Okay.
Will really not be possible, but online. Do you want to read it while we pull?
So, to, end the drama of this, there is one resolved clause in this, and it's resolved that the Environmental Commission recommends that the city council approve the, what was it you called it, Mr. Slaton? Shrimp? The shrimp? And implement the recommendations contained in the plan. As the extent of the,
So, do we have a discussion on it? Somebody move for a discussion of the plan?
Yep, we've got.
It'll be up here.
So, I'd like to pick up on a point we just recently discussed, and for me, I have one absolutely fundamental element that I would like to see added to the plan, and that is that there are specific outcomes, SMART goals that are included in the plan, so that if we recognize 1 year in, 2 year in, X years in, that we are not meeting those targets, that there's a clear responsibility of this commission, working with staff, working with contractors, working with all of our stakeholders, that we then get back on target. That was in the previous plan. We already recognized that we didn't meet basically any of those, and I do not want to have that repeated again. And it will absolutely be repeated if there are no SMART goals.
I have to agree, 100%. And also, it's clear from our review of this report that not all the recommendations weigh equally. So I think there's been some discussion. I think we should have a discussion about this, that, for example, the residential recommendation number 1 to implement year-round organics collection or compost collection, that seems to be, there was a large consensus that that's a good recommendation. The others are the commercial recommendation number 1, and to work with the city's stormwater and wastewater departments to develop and implement an ordinance requiring operating standards and reporting by restaurants and grease haulers to improve management of fats, oils, and greases generated by restaurants. And the downtown area service recommendations, the downtown has been a problem that's been recognized for many years, and that these recommendations in the report look very positive to us. I think there's a broad consensus that it's necessary, for example, to change downtown collection route driver schedules to enable Saturday and Sunday collections on a half-day basis, and to mandate restaurants and bars have Saturday and Sunday collections and a minimum 4-day collection every week. I think there seems to be a broad consensus in the community that this is a valuable thing to get started and long past due. The other one would be the recommendation to establish separate and discrete service arrangements within the DDA boundaries, utilizing a single service provider, given the multiplicity of contractors within the downtown area. It seems like a very useful thing to pursue in the near term. So we've struggled with this quite a bit in terms of giving a blanket approval, because there are no recommendations, there is no prioritization herein. So I think the first thing I would agree with Commissioner Mursky that the first thing to do is to recommend priorities and top-level outcome-based performance targets, with a regular review. So given all these concerns among the commission members, I think we would like to see these as part of the resolved, as part of the resolution that we will be discussing. Now, it's not clear to me how to structure this. Either we can agree to amend, we can discuss about amending the resolution offered by city staff, or we could present an alternative. So I'm not sure exactly what to do.
I would suggest that the council work session on this topic, offering any kind of endorsement, either partial or entire, is premature at this point in time. I think.
If I could make a recommendation, maybe the best thing is just to defer it. We've captured the thoughts from this evening. I think we bring those back to council when we have the work session with some revisions, get their input. That's your meeting, that's right the week before your meeting. I think if we come back the following week with addressing those with some revisions in the plan, you can then have a cleaner set of recommendations on it, and then council can adopt it first meeting in October, assuming we all get to that point. I think it's a better process than having some degree of dissent in a recommendation for adoption. I think, to John's point, we do have performance measures we've been using internally, and we need to make those available externally that deal with diversion rates, collections, and some of the quality of service indicators. There are some that you probably want to see us add that are a little different. So I don't think that's a heavy lift to get there. I think we can do that, and I think we can get to a point where this adoption is more celebratory than contrary.
I also think it's super confusing, certainly to council, to get, hey, do these things, but not, and being silent on the rest of it. I would prefer that we just defer any resolution on this until September. That would be.
I appreciate that. I think it's just important that we have a broader consensus. And it may be that there are some remaining concerns about the residential collection, but I think the other things we can address in the kind of specificity that you're looking for.
Okay, great.
If I can comment briefly, I support that as well. I think what's not evident in the discussion tonight and over the last several days is that there are actually a lot of, I think, good agreements and a consensus that many of the recommendations, good recommendations and consensus that the recommendations are generally good. Year-round compost collection, yes. Curbside textile collection, basically, yes. Bulky item collection, yes, if there's a clear way of making sure it just doesn't go to landfill, which is not identified, by the way, in the report. I mean, I can go down a lot of these things. There is general level of support for most of the things in here, and to try to parse that out tonight in a resolution with a bunch of exceptions and this and that, I think is totally confusing. I endorse Councilmember Smith's proposal.
Let's also recognize, though, that this is not an a la carte dining list. These things are related and connected by where the revenue comes from and cost of service.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think.
Okay, so
Christopher.
So move the table, sorry, John.
okay, Chris? Yeah.
Move the table.
Sorry?
Move the table, the resolution.
Is it seconded?
I would try and clean that up a little by saying, a move to postpone action until our September meeting on the resolution.
Friendly amendment to the motion to table. Thank you,
All
Chair.
right.
Second.
Is that seconded? Any discussion, any further discussion? No? All who say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No, so that the motion to The recommendation is approved unanimously. All right. So, so the next item on the agenda is, involves regulating pesticide use. So Commissioner, or Council Member Bannister?
Yes. I am happy to report that at the behest of some of our couple organizations in town, the Pesticide Free Ann Arbor and the Be Safe Ann Arbor, we're building on the momentum that we've had the last couple months of convincing the Washtenaw County Road Commission not to use the pesticides and herbicides in their work along the roads. So we're building on that to expand education and outreach, trying to reduce chemicals in the environment here in the city. And so we have a first draft of the resolution, but we are going to be expanding on it and building it out. And I'd like to call up Alana and Rita if they would, if we have time at the commission's pleasure, or are we at the end of our rope trying to wrap things up?
If they could be brief,
Okay.
that would be appreciated.
Okay, well, we could call them up to elaborate, if they would like, you know, on some of the things we've been emailing about, such as looking at the volume and weight of all toxic chemicals being left in Ann Arbor. And so we'd be happy to copy you all in our various drafts, and we will also be looking to maybe being a major feature on the agenda for the Environmental Commission's December 3rd meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alana and Rita.
Thank you. Yeah, so just briefly, we're kind of trying to figure out, you know, does Ann Arbor have a kind of comprehensive policy about pesticide use and herbicide use? We know that there's kind of a, been very progressive, kind of no spray on lawns and parks. So to maybe like formalize that or kind of understand, you know, can we get that in writing? And then there's other places that Ann Arbor doesn't have jurisdiction, like we talked about railroads. There's maybe some spraying along there that was brought up as an issue. And then there's concern about some of these more dangerous pesticides that have been, where they've been banned, and then now they're rolling back those, the EPA is rolling back those restrictions. So is there some kind of legal stand we can take as well by petitioning the Michigan Commission of Agriculture and Rural Development? So we do have, the City Council does have the ability to petition that commission in order to make us exempt from the preemptive state laws. So we could have stricter laws in the city of Ann Arbor. So those are just some different things we're thinking about as far as a resolution that then we could submit to City Council to see, you know, if there's any momentum to take action on this issue. I don't know. Do you have anything to add?
Well, first off, I want to say thanks, Councilmember Bannister, for the draft that you provided, and I think that it's a really good start. And we had some ideas subsequent to reviewing it that included some of the things similar to what were mentioned tonight, using some benchmarks, looking at how pesticides are used in town so that we know something measurable from the city's use, but also, so that's just one part of it. And we would love to have some support for community education. So in my work in the, as one of the co-founders of Be Safe Ann Arbor, we've done some door-to-door kind of work, but if we can do something that's broader that encourages the community to use less pesticides in general, we think that that would be beneficial for the community as a whole. And so those are the kinds of things that we'd like to do, is some education and some measurement. So I think that's great. Thanks.
So yeah, we look forward to discussing it further when the resolution is completed. Thank you.
Hey, Emily, I have a question.
Oh, yes.
On Legistar, there's a link to a memo from the city attorney's office regarding pesticide and state law, but I don't see any file there.
Me either.
Oh.
Yep, I looked.
Yeah, I was looking.
I did too.
There is a memorandum, under the resolution, but I don't think that's
where I
it.
saw it. in
That's
your
different.
email. That's where.
Okay.
Oh, it's in our email. Ah, okay. Oh,
Sorry about that. It was there earlier.
Okay.
So, Councilmember Bannister and wonderful ladies, as a person who works in the green industry, I don't apply pesticides or herbicides or insecticides or fungicides. I nonetheless am very well aware of what goes on. I would really appreciate it if you'd be much more specific about what you're talking about and why you're talking about those particular things in the things you're going to propose and do. For example, I applauded the action against the county about herbiciding on the roadways because of the material they were using, which was essentially Agent Orange revisited. I think the railroads are using it too. And I applauded that because that particular herbicide is durable in the soil. Other herbicides are not. They work on the respiration of a leaf and are ephemeral. So there are bad things out there, a few of them, much less than there used to be. There are things that are not so bad that those of us in the industry would be unhappy to lose as tools. So I ask you to be very specific and aim at the bad guys, not the bad people in the industry, but the bad products and how they're used. One of the big problems is how homeowners use these things as opposed to the commercial guys. So forgive me for suggesting more specificity.
Well, that's okay. This was a discussion at a previous Environmental Commission meeting about the county's use of pesticides. So I think this requires some discussion about, first of all, what we might recommend. I mean, personally, I think that if we could just recommend that citizens and businesses use a level of responsible environmental management equal to what the city's doing, because the city did file a statement with us a few months ago stating what their practices are in general. And I think if we could maybe say that if we could encourage businesses and residents to apply those same standards, that would be a step in the right direction. However, the legal authority is still in question that the city may have to pass regulations stricter than the states. So in that sense, it may become like more of a proposal at the state level rather than the city level, government level. So that's my, are there any other comments? Yes.
Well, yes, we very much thank you all for your input, and I think we will definitely be running our drafts through this commission for all of your inputs, and we do want to get very specific and have measurable targets, and so we will be calling on your expertise as we formulate our drafts.
I guess it's insecticides that bother me the most. Some of them that are commonly used right now do affect pollinators. So
Yeah, like
regulations at state and national level is not adequate. We could have some influence.
That's true, especially with chlorpyrifos. That's banned in the European Union.
Yep.
Okay, is there any more discussion on this
Just
issue?
very briefly, the way it's written right now, it really just focuses on the city with a capital C and city assets. And I think it was expressed here, but I'd like to see a resolution that expands on that, even if it's just education, outreach, and things like that, because we may be running up against issues with state law and things like that. But I don't think, in terms of education and outreach, that we're limited to do things in terms of encouragement of the right kinds of practices. And right now, that's not really reflected in the document that we have yet.
Yes, we ran it through the attorney's office first, and so that was their first pass at it. And then yes, we do recognize that this needs a lot more of our signatures on it.
I'd also recommend making the resolution that you proposed non-contradictory because an integrated pest management approach may actually involve using herbicides.
Mm-hmm.
Integrated pest management is the best approach that you can use. It's comprehensive. It may very well involve herbicides and non-herbicide methods to be able to solve your problem. It looks at a problem as opposed to a pest. So to say that you're proposing or supporting integrated pest management and then saying that that you're moving toward an herbicide or a pesticide-free community is inherently contradictory.
Okay.
I might invite you all to send any recommendations already, and you could copy our team so far, whoever wants to be on the team, but core members are Alana, me, Rita, and another woman named Julie, and then anyone else who wants to be on it. But if you send it to me, I'll get it to all of them, and we can start receiving your valuable tidbits that we will integrate into it.
Towards that end, it would be great if you would prompt us and maybe set up a Google Doc where there is a draft of something. Maybe you add some additional comments of the things that you're contemplating on top of what is already in there, and then we can revise the text. We can, although that may be problem with, okay.
I never thought I'd be in a position where I'd be the FOIA police, but
Yeah, right,
you need to be
okay.
careful about where you send things
Okay.
as well. So
Yep.
Ms. Bannister has a A2Gov email, keeps things cleaner for all of us if you
Yep.
do that.
Okay. But some kind of prompt and some kind of structure we can do, that would be great.
And Howard, one last point too, in terms of you should not be writing a resolution together as a group outside of this. Like a subcommittee can write it, but you would be in violation of the Open Meeting Act. You would
Yeah.
be doing business outside as a full body, so that can't happen. So I recommend a subcommittee of people who want to work on this, who can take it offline, but you can't collectively write it.
It violates the council's policy.
Yeah.
That's true.
Okay.
Thank
Now,
you.
how does
Advisory
that
bodies.
work if I get 6 different emails and I cut and paste them and all and share them? How does that work for that? Is that not allowed?
Could we do this through natural features?
Yes.
And do it through natural features in that working group, and then you could invite other people to put input through the natural features working group, for example. We'll let the experts.
I am not well qualified to comment on the legal aspects of the Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, well, we'll review
I'll
that.
get it reviewed.
Yeah.
We'll
Great.
answer that
How
question for you.
how
on
to
exactly
do,
We'll
how
review
to
that.
assemble the tidbits
Yeah.
of advice.
Okay, so, okay.
Wonderful.
So now we have reports from committees,
There's a
other
comment down
commissions,
here.
council and chair. Oh, I'm sorry.
Even though there's a lot of expertise in this group, I would also encourage you to reach out to the Natural Areas Preservation portion of the city, because they are real leaders in a lot of this kind of management work, especially the toolbox that Commissioner Apple is referring to. And I think they can provide some resources and experience in helping you parse out what makes sense to kind of go after and not. And they work within a certain context, but I think they would be an excellent resource for you that this part of the city already that has a real track record that could help you try to formulate where you're going with some of this, and just understanding what their experiences with the tools that they use, because they definitely use herbicides, I can tell you that much, and we need that work for our invasive management control in the city. And so it's these apparently divergent things that are going on where we're also actively battling against invasive species too, and that's one of the tools out there. So there's these competing forces that we're trying to balance and work with, and I totally support your effort. I just wanted to get much more fine-tuned about considering some of Commissioner Graham's comments about, like, there's a whole host of things out there, and just calling it the pesticide, it's just, you got to get way more specific or way more broad to be able to get much more targeted about what you're going to do in order for it to be effective, I feel like. So I totally applaud the effort, but I also want to make sure that we continue to have the tools that we need for these other really important forces that are working out there at the same time, so.
Okay, thank you. Are there any reports from the Planning Commission?
Yeah, so we have been working on a lot of ordinances, and one that we just worked on this last session was integrating the current, when Michigan voted to legalize recreational use of marijuana, we had to update our ordinance in terms of our marijuana policy. And it had all been geared towards medical, and now we need to figure out how to integrate the recreational piece of it too. And one of the things that we are considering is asking them to include solar energy as part of their site plans, because they are huge energy users compared to other uses. So a typical office is a tenth of the energy use, if for a comparable size of a grower. This is for growers only, not for dispensaries. So we had started with the 25% target and then got more information about what's realistic, and they're going right now for a 10% target, but I'm hoping that with some coordination perhaps with Commissioner Mursky and the Energy Commission, that we can get a little more fine-tuned about what some of our options are in terms of an ask, because I think that they are, they can really nullify a lot of our other work we're doing to try to be able to bring energy consumption down. In fact, I read some incredibly dire reporting that said that if the trend continues with the way that growers are growing, that we can nullify the advancements we have made since the Paris Accord, because there are so many people getting into the business and it's so lucrative, and they just are energy hogs because they're growing 24/7, and the amount of light that they use and the air exchange that they use per hour, it's like 30 air exchanges per hour. The wattage is similar to what's used in a medical operating room. It's 500 times the recommended reading level. I mean, it's just incredible the amount of energy that they're using. And so different communities are managing this in different ways. Not a lot of them have taken it on, but Massachusetts is actually limiting the wattage that they can use and handling it that way, which is actually leading to some very interesting kind of honing and research on how to grow things in a more efficient way, which is great, because that really needs to happen within the industry. And since it's a cash business, there's not a lot of incentive to kind of look for the payback and, that kind of thing, which is always the argument with alternative energy. So aside from, reducing greenhouse gases and all that good stuff. So we're looking for ways to be able to get them to take some responsibility for how much energy they do use, because it's not just them paying their bills, it's the impact on we're working hard on our sustainability framework, and boy, it would really be sad if that all got reversed, because we're one of the few communities that are actually regulating this. Many communities are just opting out of the whole process, and so that may mean that we become sort of a center for some of this in this part of the state, because it takes planners and people writing code and all that kind of thing to do it, and some of the townships are like, forget it, why do we want to take this on? So we're trying to be thoughtful about how we can start to interface our sustainability desires with what they can bring to the table too, and in terms of their impact. And I'm hoping to be able to have some meaningful conversations with Commissioner Mursky about ways that we might be able to do that, so that whether it's some seed money towards programs within the city that are focused on alternative energy that they can, I don't know what it is yet, but I'm hoping that we can try to, it's like the one healthy part of retail right now is weed, folks. I've heard retail is going down the tubes, except for Amazon, but that one is doing really well. So I feel like there's opportunity there that we can ask. And I think we should. So I think we could maybe get courageous about being bold here. So that's coming in front of Planning Commission. I'd love to see some integration with some of the other commissions to see what we can do and try to figure out how to deal with the trend and figure out what we can do as a community to be able to put some processes in place so that we can mitigate it and maybe try to handle this in terms of some modeling, for other communities, because it seems like the trend is moving in this direction, and so it would be great for us to try to take that one on. So
Yeah. It's a similar problem to Bitcoin mining, isn't it?
Right.
Bitcoin mining
yeah.
uses enormous amounts of energy. In fact, they locate these server farms near hydro, where there's cheap electric rates, usually. So I'm not sure how they've been regulated, but it's a very similar problem.
Maybe just very, very briefly, Energy Commission. We had a working session, so I won't get into a lot of detail. We had a presentation from the Office of Sustainability on major work plan elements and where we can overlap on those. The Commission broadly identified 4 areas that we'd like to work on without a whole lot of specificity, but there's going to be working groups set up for those 4 areas with the hope that they will narrow their focus. Just a couple of other things. Ordinances, I've talked about ordinances before, good progress on all of them. Sign ordinance, where we had some input on, is now through the Planning Commission, and I think sent on to city attorney and council. Lighting ordinance is complete from our side and is now with Planning Commission to take up. And 2 other ordinances that we're working on, EV readiness and a home energy audit disclosure at time of marketing, hopefully will be complete and be able to be passed on through Energy Commission, also for council consideration in October, November, more likely maybe November timeframe. Oh, maybe one other thing, we're putting on power hours again. One is on September 17th and one is on December 3rd, focusing primarily on energy efficiency and what homeowners can do, residents can do, but then also with another plug for solar. And solar prices keep on coming down in spite of what you might have heard with Chinese tariffs and everything else. It's amazing. It's coming down and down and down. So solar is not out. Thanks.
Okay. Let's see, I guess committees. Chris.
Natural features. It was concluded a couple of meetings ago to really focus on better protections for trees in the city. And there are really 3 areas of weakness. The least of those is the current regulation in the site planning process. Protections for trees, they're very good, actually. But it's been suggested that we need to do a bit more for older trees, special trees. Heritage trees is the word that's been used and the Planning Commission likes. That probably is relatively easy. We might make another natural feature called heritage trees in addition to landmark trees, or it's a subset of landmark trees, and we increase the leverage the city has on what happens to those in a development project. The second area of concern is how to regulate the loss, and there is a lot of loss, of trees on single-family properties. There currently is 0 regulation for that. And we were thinking of doing something on the model of the stormwater first flush rain garden requirement for any addition more than 200 square feet would also trigger a tree identification and protection process for what goes on those properties when that addition is being put on. For example, if you drive wheeled vehicles over the roots of a beech tree or an oak tree, and it's an old heritage tree on somebody's property, and you say, oh, no, we're not going to cut that. The contractor says, oh, no, we're not going to cut that tree, but you do that, and 3 or 4 years later, the tree dies. And the homeowner goes, what in the world happened here? And of course, almost none of them know anything about the reason that tree died. There's no connection. So if we have a process like our rain garden first flush process where homeowners have to be educated about how things might happen on their property with regard to their trees, even if they intentionally want to take one, it would be a net improvement. The last area is grading plans. Again, on single-family zone properties, there's absolutely no recognition that there are trees on that property, and they can be completely cleared without a permit under 10,000 square feet and with one above, and the one above does trigger some worry about trees. So we're really, it's really a big hole, and there's a project down in Packard where that could apply if push came to shove. So the other piece that's kind of a current focus is to do something to contribute to John Mirsky's Power Hours that would take the education part of that outside and to look at what one does in the landscape to be doing sustainable things as opposed to unsustainable ones or not enough. Thank you.
So I'll speak for Solid Waste Committee. Outside discussions about the SWRMP proposal, we've talked about our SMART goal is metrics for diversion and for greenhouse gases. So we've made some progress on that, but we hope to be finished in a few months. And drafting a zero waste, just the skeleton of the zero waste goals for the city. That's taken a backbench because of this extensive SWRMP process that's been going on for the past year. But I hope to come up with something by the end of the year. Let's see. Yeah, that's Susan. So Susan's not here, so does anybody want to?
We have.
Okay. Okay. So, council?
Parks.
So?
Parks.
Parks.
Pools are open till September 15th. And we also heard a report on legacy contamination around the Nature House up at Leslie Science Center. Nature House and the DTE Energy House, which staff has been pretty responsive in terms of dealing with. One benefit was or one of the upsides of this, the same consultants that were hired to do additional work on the Gelman plume were also brought in to do the soil sampling around the DTE Energy House where the site of the contamination is likely located. So yeah, the city is doing a good job of getting a handle on where the pollution is on the site, and ideally we'll be hearing some opportunities for cleanup here by the time we meet next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I understand that was due to the Leslie family had a gas station on the land, that most of the pollution was from that?
Dr. Leslie was a chemist and experimenter of sorts. So yeah, he had an orchard up there. So there are remnants of agricultural chemicals. There are remnants of all sorts of various. A lot of things that I won't try to quote now because I won't remember the names. But arsenic is particularly common around the site, and they suspect that was from the agricultural operations because arsenic was used extensively historically as a pesticide.
Was there any further discussion of having other project grow sites around the city similarly tested for contamination?
We didn't discuss that, no. One thing that we did discuss in the Land Acquisition Committee meeting was that as as part of due diligence moving forward for any parcels that the city will acquire for parks, there will be an investigation into legacy contamination. So those are the upsides that we can get out of this, at least.
Okay, I had just had a recollection that Assistant Administrator John Fournier had thought that it would be a good idea to have testing at all Project Grow sites, and I hadn't heard whether that had gotten off the ground or not.
Councilmember, I think the best thing to do is I'll catch up with him and Mr. Delacorte and
Thank you.
give you an answer. I know there was a discussion, but at this late hour, I don't know that I remember precisely what it was.
Okay.
So,
Hey,
And many of those Project Grow sites are not on Parks property as well. Many of them
Right.
are on private sites.
private side.
Or county? Okay, council?
I had some updates from council, but I also had like maybe a question for Howard Lazarus, that I thought this group might be interested in, that heat island blanket testing that was going on top of the city hall roof. It got rained out this week, but that was curious if anyone
There's
remembers.
a entity that wanted to fly a drone around to measure heat island in the right-of-way, but they got rained out. And that's about all I know about it right now. We did give them permission to do it. If you'd like, I can forward some other information about what the intent of the study was.
I think I already received some of the email on
Ms.
it,
Higgins
so
sent it.
it was just an interesting study going on.
There was a gentleman flying a drone around on Tuesday morning, I think, and then it got rained out in the afternoon. It's interesting, and we can share whatever we know if it's of interest.
We love data. Thank you.
Of interest to this body, council has another closed session Monday night to talk about the ongoing legal discussions regarding Gelman. We have a joint meeting with the county and Scioto Township on September 12th to discuss. So, we'll bring something back, obviously, in September, an update on where we are with that.
Okay. I don't have anything to add. Report from staff?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. We're putting solar on fire station number 6, and we're doing it through the volunteer program. So if anybody's interested in getting up on a roof and helping install solar, contact Josh McDonald. We're also doing solar on 13 city buildings, so that's moving forward rather quickly. You'll be getting a greenhouse gas presentation next meeting from Josh. This is a fun one. There's been a solid waste challenge for staff, and this was an idea that came from 3 of our interns. About 45 people have been taking actions each week to reduce solid waste usage or to use reusable containers. 100 people are receiving emails. We've had some great participation from HR, NAP, and Fuller. Over 1,000 actions have taken place in 2 weeks, so it's really exciting. As well, we've had some really good attendance at our Lunch and Learns, which are an opportunity for staff to learn about all kinds of sustainability issues. Some of the topics we've recently had are the circular economy, how to transform workplaces into multicultural institutions, and city parks using fire and other tools to manage our parklands. And a special shout out to our summer equity intern, Rebecca Villegas, who'll be returning to grad school at University of Michigan soon. She's been helping us develop a plan for expanding weatherization opportunities for low-income homeowners in Ann Arbor. That's what I have for now.
Okay, thank you. Items for next agenda.
I had a couple other, not agenda items, but other updates of things that were current events.
Okay.
just briefly, the KI, potassium iodine group, is meeting on Monday in Detroit with a Detroit council member, a guy named Roy McAllister, to try to get them to model after our potassium iodide resolution. The environmental activist picnic last weekend at Island Park was a huge success and brought together all sorts of environmental groups from all over the city. And out of that, one of the things coming up on September 20 is going to be is it an energy boycott on Friday, September 20?
Climate strike.
Yeah. Climate strike. We'll be hearing more about that coming up on September 20. Subgroups have also been meeting with the Climate Mobilization Group, and there's a group of young 20-somethings who are going for zero carbon emissions by 2025. They'd like for an emergency action plan. So we've got a whole spectrum of activists working around the city. On October 24, here at the Environmental Commission, we're going to have a follow-up on the food waste discussions that we've been having with food gatherers, and also ICPJ has expressed interest, so we'll be hearing more about composting on October 24. And then just a reminder to you guys, just in case, the Greenbelt Advisory Committee is receiving our comments about their strategic plan. They've had that millage for 15 years, and we can attend a meeting on Thursday, September 5, here in this chamber from 4:30 to 7, or on October 3rd in this chamber to hear a public presentation and things about, there's some possibility that there's $6 million left in the millage money that could be used within the city. So that, if you have opinions or comments on that, you can email them to greenbelt@a2gov.org. And then just lastly, Sonic Lunch today had a couple thousand people out for the Michael Fronte concert, and he told us all, had us all thinking about the fire in the Amazon currently, and had us all singing about how we're all earthlings. And so it was great. It was really a high point in the summer to have all those thousands of Ann Arborites out singing about earthlings.
Okay, well, thanks, Council. So I just want to mention that our next meeting is going to be on September 24th, the fourth Thursday of the month, September 26th, I mean. And I think we want to focus on the next month. I was hoping we would focus on the city's sustainability efforts. Josh McDonald's going to present, and we'll talk about progress in that area. And then as Councilmember Bannister mentioned, in October, we'd like to talk about food waste with food gatherers, presenting on some of their ideas and some of the other nonprofits in the community that are trying to help with food diversion and other issues related to that. And then in December 3rd, we will talk about natural features and pesticides, herbicides as a theme. I would like to do that. So we haven't had much discussion about it here, but I think this is the first time I've proposed this in the commission meeting. But this is, if there's any suggestions or comments, I'd appreciate it. And as we're forming the agenda for next month. So this brings us to public commentary, the second public commentary period. Is there anybody who wants to stand up to the microphone, make a comment? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So I move for adjournment.
Thank you
Perfect.
very much.
Okay. Sorry. Second. All right.
You can
Thank
just
everybody.
adjourn us. Yes.